The first thing Ethan Reed felt was the taste of dirt in his mouth. Wet, greasy dirt with a hint of something sour. He was lying face down and couldn't tell which way was up and which was down. His body was intact. He realized this right away because the pain was everywhere, which meant everything was in place. He tried to lift his head and saw 3 pairs of feet in straw sandals. Someone poked him in the side with a long bamboo stick. Then again, Ethan rolled onto his back and stared up at the sky. The sky wasn't right. Too blue, too deep, 2 suns. He blinked. No. 1 sun, and next to it, a shimmering ring like a rainbow halo. 3 men in coarse hemp robes stood over him, looking at him the way one looks at a dead dog that suddenly started breathing again. One of them was an old man with a wrinkled face and a yoke on his shoulder. Ethan opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at himself. He was naked, completely. Not a shred of fabric. His skin was covered with something sticky, like slime, and his right palm glowed blue, not brightly. A soft, even glow, like a phone screen in the dark. Ethan raised his hand and stared at his palm. Something appeared in his mind. Not a voice. Not text, something in between, as if someone had unfolded a blueprint right before his eyes, not on paper, but directly inside his skull. The inscription read, Production Matrix, Level 1, Status, Active, Raw Materials Required for the First Project. Ethan sat down in the mud of the rice paddy and said the only thing that came to mind. He said he needed a pair of pants. The old man with the rocker took a step back. The other 2 exchanged glances. One of them spoke, and Ethan understood him. It was impossible, but he understood every word. The man said that a naked demon had fallen from the sky, and that they needed to call the village headman. Ethan stood up. His knees were shaking. His head was spinning. He looked around. Rice paddies. Beyond them, a bamboo grove. Behind that, the rooftops of a small village. Mountains on the horizon. Tall, unnaturally tall. Mountains like that don't exist. They stretched into the clouds and beyond, and it seemed as though they had no peaks at all. The air smelled different, cleaner than anything Ethan had ever breathed. And there was something else in that air, something like static electricity, a tingling on his skin, pressure in his temples. He didn't know what it was. Later, he would learn that it was the remnants of spiritual ki energy. But right now, he was just standing naked in a rice paddy, trying not to fall. The old man suddenly lowered his arm and took off his outer robe. He held it out to Ethan, not out of kindness. It was out of a desire for the naked stranger to stop frightening him with his appearance. Ethan took the robe. He draped it over his shoulders. It reeked of sweat and smoke, but these were the best pants he'd ever had, even though they weren't actually pants. He tucked in the hems and looked at the old man. The old man was staring at his right palm. The glow hadn't faded. Ethan hid his hand behind his back. He followed the old man toward the village. Every step was a struggle. Not because his body ached, but because with every step he understood more and more clearly. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a coma. This wasn't a deathbed hallucination caused by his brain being smashed against the steering column. This was real. The village was called Willow Creek. 24 houses made of clay and bamboo, straw roofs, chickens, skinny pigs, children with dirty faces who scattered from Ethan as if he were the plague. The village elder turned out to be a gaunt old man of about 60, with a single tooth in the front of his mouth and the look of someone who'd seen it all. He eyed Ethan from head to toe. He asked 3 questions. Who are you? Where are you from? Why are you naked? Ethan replied that he was a craftsman, that he had come from far away, and that his clothes had been lost along the way. It was the most plausible lie he could come up with, standing barefoot in a stranger's robe, in the middle of a village from another millennium. The village elder didn't believe him, but he didn't chase him away either. Instead, he pointed to a dilapidated shed on the edge of the village and said the master could live there if he repaired John Bayek's rocker arm. John Bayek turned out to be the very same old man from the rice field. His rocker arm was broken. The crack ran the entire length. Ethan picked up a stick, and the matrix in his head came to life. A load diagram unfolded. It showed the stress points. It highlighted where the wood had weakened from moisture and where from improper weight distribution. Ethan asked for a knife and a piece of rope. They gave him a blunt knife and a strip of bast. In 10 minutes, he had restrung the yoke so that the load was distributed evenly along its entire length. Old man John Baik hoisted it onto his shoulders. He hung 2 buckets on it. He walked a short distance. He stopped. He turned to Ethan, and his expression changed. It was the face of a man who had carried water for 30 years, and for the first time felt no pain in his shoulder. He said nothing. He simply nodded. But that nod was worth more than any words. Ethan was given a shed. On his first night, he lay on a straw mat and stared at the ceiling. Through the holes in the roof, he could see the sky. Stars, foreign stars, not a single familiar constellation. His right palm glowed blue, casting soft shadows on the walls. The matrix hung in his mind, silent, waiting, like a program that had been downloaded but not launched. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to remember the highway, the headlights, the crash. That was it. There was nothing between the crash and the rice field. No tunnel, no light, no voice of God explaining the rules. Just darkness and then dirt in his mouth. He didn't know why he was here. He didn't know how to get back. He didn't know what kind of world this was. But he knew one thing. He'd fixed the rocker arm. So his hands worked. So his mind worked. So he could go on living. In the morning, Ethan woke up to a scream. A child's scream. He bolted out of the shed in just his robe and saw a boy of about 10 rolling on the ground and clutching his burned arm. Standing over him was a young man, about 20 years old, wearing a white robe that was cleaner than anything Ethan had seen in this village. A short sword hung at his belt. His face wore an expression of such boredom and such superiority that Ethan instantly recognized this type. He'd met people like this before, in the army, at the factory, anywhere where one person has power over another and enjoys it. The guy in the white robe was a cultist, a follower of some small sect. Ethan didn't know those words yet, but he saw the essence of it. Standing before him was a man who could shoot fire from the palm of his hand and believed that this gave him the right to abuse children. The disciple raised his hand. A small ball of fire, the size of a tangerine, formed on his fingers. He aimed it at the boy. The villagers stood around in silence. Not one moved. Ethan looked at the apprentice. He looked at the child. He looked at his right palm. The matrix pulsed. It was waiting for a command. Ethan turned and walked back into the barn, but not because he was afraid. It was because he needed the night. One night. The apprentice threw a fireball at the wall of the nearest house. The clay cracked. The straw began to smolder. He declared that he would come tomorrow for the tribute. 10 sacks of rice. And if it wasn't ready, he would burn down 3 houses. He turned and left. The villagers put out the fire on the wall. They bandaged the boy's arm. Ethan sat in the shed and worked. The matrix was running at full capacity. For the first time since its activation, he gave it a task. A weapon, the simplest kind, made from what was available. Bamboo, a bowstring from an old bow he'd found in the corner of the shed, a nail, a single rusty nail he'd begged from the blacksmith in exchange for repairing his hammer, and a pinch of red pollen. He'd gotten it from an old herbalist. The old woman lived on the outskirts of the village and collected pollen from some plant she called the explosive lotus. She used it against bed bugs. When Ethan placed his palm on the pinch of pollen, the matrix displayed the data. High-energy organic oxidizer. Ignition temperature, 42 degrees. Impact sensitivity, moderate. Analog, unstable gunpowder with increased brisance. Ethan looked at this data, and his hands trembled. Not out of fear, out of realization. This old woman had been killing bedbugs with a substance whose characteristics were closer to quicksilver than to dust. He worked all night, cutting bamboo, planing, turning. The matrix suggested the proportions and angles. His hands remembered. 7 years at the drafting table, 4 years in the army, thousands of hours at the lathe. His fingers did what his brain hadn't yet had time to formulate. By dawn, a contraption lay on the workbench. Ugly, crooked, a bamboo barrel, a spring mechanism made from a bent bowstring, a firing pin made from a nail, a combustion chamber made from a clay cylinder coated on the inside with resin, a single round. A bullet made from a stone ball, wrapped in bast and soaked in explosive lotus pollen. A single shot, spring-loaded pistol. Ethan took it in his hands and felt its weight, 300 grams, maybe 400. He estimated the effective range at 20 meters, maybe 15. The barrel was smoothbore. The accuracy was abysmal. 1 misfire out of 3. But that was enough. He stepped out from behind the shed and fired at a tree. The roar echoed throughout the village. There was no visible hole in the tree, but the bark had cracked, and a stone pellet was sticking out of the trunk, embedded 2 fingers deep. The villagers ran out of their houses. Ethan hid the pistol under his robe and said he'd fallen. By noon, the apprentice arrived, just as he'd promised. He walked down the village's main road with a sword at his belt and a fireball in his palm, like a magician with a tangerine. Behind him stood an empty cart for rice. The villagers lined up along the road. The apprentice lay in the dust for about 5 minutes. Then he got up, clutching his shoulder with his hand. Blood flowed through his fingers, but the wound wasn't fatal. Ethan knew where he'd aimed: flesh and skin. No arteries, no bones, a clean hit on soft tissue. The apprentice looked at Ethan, and there was no anger in his eyes. There was fear, the raw animal fear of someone who, for the first time in his life, had encountered something beyond his comprehension. He turned and ran. He abandoned the cart. He dropped his sword into the dust. He simply ran down the road away from the village, clutching his wounded shoulder. Ethan watched him go and assessed the situation. A disciple of a minor sect. That meant he'd report it to his elders. The elders will come to investigate. It's a matter of days, maybe weeks, no more than that. He picked up the abandoned sword. The matrix instantly began its analysis. Low quality steel, a thin layer of spiritual energy on the blade. The formation is the simplest kind, reinforcement of the cutting edge, lower earth rank. A sword like this sells for 30 to 50 spiritual stones at the market in the nearest town. Ethan didn't yet know what spiritual stones were, but the Matrix had already cataloged the data. The village elder approached and said that this sword now belonged to the master by right of victory. Ethan nodded and carried it to the shed, not as a weapon, but as raw material. For the first 3 days after the incident, Ethan didn't leave the shed. He worked. The Matrix demanded data, and he gathered it. Every stone, every piece of wood, every handful of earth. He would place his palm against it and scan it. The village's clay contained traces of iron oxide. The bamboo in the grove had a tensile strength higher than that of most structural steels. The water from the stream carried traces of minerals that didn't exist in any geology textbook. The Matrix classified them as spiritual lie, active components, and assigned approximate analogs from Earth's chemistry. On the 4th day, a girl came to him. She was short, with slender arms and her hair tied in a simple knot. A canvas bag of dried herbs hung from her belt. She introduced herself. So Minji, the granddaughter of the village herbalist. She said her grandmother had sent her to ask how the master knew about the red pollen. Ethan replied that he had sensed its properties through touch. Minji wasn't surprised. In a world where people flew on swords and hurled fire from their palms, sensing properties through touch was a perfectly normal skill. She was surprised by something else. She asked why he had called the pollen an oxidizer. Ethan froze. He hadn't expected that question, not from a peasant girl from a mountain village. He explained, slowly, choosing his words carefully. An oxidizer is a substance that transfers heat to other substances and causes them to burn faster and more intensely. Explosive lotus pollen does exactly that. It doesn't burn on its own. It causes everything around it to burn. Minji listened. Her eyes were focused. She didn't nod or chime in. She was thinking. Then she took 3 different bundles of herbs out of her bag and laid them out in front of him. She asked him to describe each one. Ethan placed his palm on the first one. The matrix provided the data. Cooling agent, endothermic reaction temperature -8. Analog, organic antifreeze. Onto the second, binding agent, polymerizes upon contact with moisture. Analog, natural epoxy. Onto the third, spiritual energy conductor. Resistance to key flow is close to 0. Analog, room temperature superconductor. Ethan pulled his hand away from the third bundle and looked at Minji. She calmly looked back at him. She said that this herb is called the silver vein. It grows only on the northern slopes. Grandma says it can't be sold because the cultivators will take it and won't pay.
Ethan took the silver vein in his hands and his engineer's brain kicked into high gear. A superconductor, room temperature, organic, grows in the ground. Back on Earth, corporations would kill for material like this. Here they use it to kill bedbugs and treat joint pain. He asked Minji if she knew of any other herbs with unusual properties. She gave him a long look and replied that she knew 400 varieties. Ethan offered her a job, not the way jobs are offered in this world, not as an order.
Not as a favor. He said he needed someone who knew the local materials, that he would pay her, that he would ask for her opinion. Minji was silent. Then she asked what asking for her opinion meant. Ethan said it meant he would ask questions and wait for an answer, and if her answer was better than his own idea, he would do as she said. Minji was silent again, for a long time. Then she said she would come tomorrow morning. She came every morning for the next 3 weeks. Ethan rebuilt the shed. The village headman assigned him an abandoned smithy on the outskirts of the village. It was small and full of soot, with a crooked bellows and a single anvil with a chipped edge. Ethan repaired the bellows in 2 days. The matrix showed him how to rebuild the air ducts so that the temperature inside would be more stable. He leveled the anvil using a spiritual stone he found in a stream. The stone turned out to be the size of a fingernail, but the matrix classified it as an energy source equivalent to 20 watts of direct current. That wasn't enough for anything serious, but it was enough to heat the tip of a soldering iron. Ethan made a soldering iron out of a nail, a wooden handle, and copper wire he'd pulled from the village elder's teapot. The spirit stone powered the heating element. The soldering iron worked. It was the most primitive electric tool in this world, and probably the first in 10,000 years. Minji brought him materials, new samples every day, roots, bark, resins, pollen, scales from river fish that turned out not to be quite fish. Minerals from a mountain stream. Ethan scanned and cataloged them. The matrix built a database. By the end of the second week, he had 117 materials with properties that Earth science would have deemed impossible. Fibers stronger than Kevlar. Resins that hardened to a ceramic-like stat in a minute. Crystals that stored heat and released it on command. Powders that, when mixed, created a directed shock wave. Ethan sat in front of this catalog and felt like a child who'd been let into a workshop where every tool was magical. The problem lay elsewhere. He had the materials, but he didn't have the tools. Proper tools, a lathe, a drill press, at least a decent set of vise clamps. He could make rough things by hand. But for anything more precise than a spring-loaded pistol, he needed the right equipment. Ethan began building. First up was the lathe, a foot-powered one, driven by his foot. A spindle made of bamboo reinforced with a silver vein, which turned out to be the ideal reinforcing fiber. Bearings made of river stones, hand polished to a mirror-like finish. A cutting tool made from that apprentice's broken sword, spiritual steel cut through ordinary wood and stone like butter. The lathe was ugly, but it rotated and held the workpiece in place, so it was possible to sharpen it. The matrix had leveled up, a notification in his head. Production matrix. Level 2, blueprints for medium caliber small arms are available. Requires a basic level workshop and at least 2 assistants. Ethan read this and smirked. 2 assistants, he had Minji. He needed one more person. Minji worked silently and quickly. Exactly. She memorized things on the first try. If Ethan showed her how to measure out the proportions for an incendiary mixture, she'd repeat it without a single mistake. If he explained why the furnace needed to be set to a specific temperature, she wouldn't ask for clarification. She'd just do it. But most importantly, she asked questions. The right questions. Not what is this, but why does this work this way and not another? On the 16th day, she asked why Ethan didn't use thunder vine root instead of explosive lotus pollen as a propellant. Ethan scanned the root. The matrix spit out the data. More stable than pollen, less sensitive to impact, more predictable burning speed, and analog smokeless gunpowder. Ethan looked at Minji and smiled broadly for the first time in 2 weeks. He said she had just invented smokeless gunpowder. On the 32nd day, the elders arrived, 8 disciples and 3 mentors from the Iron Thorn sect, a small sect, 3rd tier.
It controlled about 15 villages within a 3-day journey's radius. That disciple with the gunshot wound to his shoulder turned out to be the nephew of one of the instructors. They arrived in the morning. Without warning, they lined up on the road in front of the village, 3 instructors in black robes with an iron thorn embroidered on their backs. 8 disciples in gray, all armed, swords, spears. One mentor had a bundle of talismans
Hanging from his belt that glowed faintly yellow. Formations.
Ethan watched from the workshop window. The matrix was scanning at maximum range. The mentors, 3rd stage of body tempering. By local standards, the beginner level. By Earth's standards, each of them could run faster than an Olympic sprinter, strike harder than a heavyweight boxer, and withstand a blow that would kill an ordinary person. The apprentices, 1st and 2nd stages. But there were 8 of them. Ethan assessed the situation. His 6 villagers with crossbows against 11 cultivators. The numbers didn't add up. He stepped out onto the workshop porch. The chief instructor stood in the middle of the road, short, stocky, a beard like wire. He spoke loudly so the whole village could hear. He said that the village of Willow Creek had insulted the Iron Thorn sect. It had wounded a disciple, refused to pay the lawful tribute. Punishment, 100 sacks of rice. The guilty master, bound and on his knees. If the conditions were not met within an hour, the village would burn. Ethan stood on the porch and listened. Then he did something the instructor didn't expect. He asked the instructor how many disciples there were in the Iron Thorn sect. The mentor was taken aback. He was used to mortals falling to their knees, not asking questions. But he answered, a habit born of arrogance. 120 disciples, 30 mentors, 3 elders. Ethan nodded. Then he asked how many villages the sect controlled. 15. Ethan nodded again. Then he said he had a counteroffer. He would repair all of the sect's weapons for free. He'd sharpen the swords, reinforce the spears, repair the formations on the talismans. In exchange, the village of Willow Creek would pay the usual tribute and everyone would forget about the incident. The mentor remained silent. He didn't understand the proposal. A mortal was bargaining. It was so far beyond his experience that he didn't know how to react. The second mentor stepped forward. The very same man who was the uncle of the wounded student. He didn't speak. He raised his hand and released a stream of ki toward Ethan. Not lethal. Overwhelming. A first-level wind technique. A wave of air meant to knock Ethan off his feet and slam him into the wall. Ethan was standing on the porch. The wave struck. He was thrown backward. His back slammed into the doorframe. His breath caught in his throat. His vision darkened. He slid down the wall and couldn't breathe for 3 seconds. The body of an ordinary person. No protection, no kilai, just flesh and bone, now crackling with pain. The mentor smirked. He turned to the villagers. He ordered them to bring rice and tie up the master. Ethan stood up, slowly, holding onto the doorframe. His head was ringing, his back was on fire, but he stood up and he whistled, once, briefly, from 3 directions. From the workshop roof. From behind the woodpile on the left, from the barn window on the right. 3 crossbows, 3 bolts, 3 shots, simultaneously, not at the mentors. Into the ground in front of them, 3 explosions, small but loud. fountains of mud and fire. The spiritual pollen flared bright orange, and the heat scorched the faces of all three instructors. They recoiled. The apprentices broke formation. Someone fell. Someone grabbed a sword. The remaining three villagers stepped forward from all sides. That made 6 crossbows, 6 loaded explosive bolts aimed at the chests of the 6 apprentices. Ethan wiped the blood from his lip and spoke. Quietly, calmly, he said that the next bolts wouldn't hit the ground. He said that his shots wouldn't miss from 10 paces. He said that every bolt pierces 3rd level defensive ki and that the instructor could test this on his own skin if he wanted. He was lying. His bolts wouldn't have pierced the 3rd level, the 2nd barely. But the instructors didn't know that. They saw the explosions. They remembered the student's pierced shoulder. And they saw 6 crossbows in the hands of people who, by all laws of the world, shouldn't have had anything more dangerous than a hoe. The chief instructor raised his hand. He stopped the apprentices. He looked at Ethan for a long time. Then he said that the master was brave for immortal and foolish because the Iron Thorn sect would return with a force that 6 crossbows could not stop. Ethan nodded and said that by then he wouldn't have 6, but 60. And not crossbows, but something much more serious. The mentor turned and walked away. He led his students away. No one looked back. Ethan waited until they had disappeared behind the hill. Then he sat down on the porch and threw up. Adrenaline, back pain, the horror of how close it had all come. Minji ran up with water and a rag. She wiped his face. He noticed that her hands were shaking, too. She told him he was an idiot. He agreed. What followed were the 3 most intense weeks of Ethan Reed's life. He slept no more than 4 hours a day. The Iron Thorn cult would return. That wasn't a question. The question was when. The Matrix ran nonstop. Ethan sketched, built, soldered, and forged. His first project, an early warning signal system. Thin strands of silver vein stretched between the trees around the village within a half-kilometer radius. Each strand was connected to a small bell in the workshop. Not magic, mechanics, a tension sensor. Whoever touches a strand, the bell rings. Primitive. But you can hear it at night. Second project, 12 more crossbows. Ethan trained new archers, village boys and girls who, just a week ago, hadn't held anything heavier than a sickle in their hands. He taught them how to stand, aim, breathe, shoot, and reload. The Matrix helped. It couldn't shoot for him, but it calculated the ballistics and suggested how to correct each archer's stance. The third project, the most important one. Ethan remelted the sword of a disciple of the Iron Thorn sect. Spiritual steel was used for the parts. From the root of the thunder vine that Minji had found, he prepared the charges. Stable. Predictable. Almost like smokeless powder. The barrels were made of bamboo, reinforced with a silver vein. The firing mechanism was made of spring steel he had extracted from the spiritual sword. The trigger was carved from the bone of some animal, hard as stone. The Matrix guided his hands through every step. A week later, the first real firearm in this world lay on the workbench. A long-barreled musket, single shot, reload time 20 seconds, effective range 40 paces. The bullet was made of leadstone that Minji had found in a stream bed. Ethan went outside the village and fired at a boulder. The bullet penetrated the stone to a depth of 3 fingers. Minji stood nearby and looked at the hole in the boulder. She asked how many of these he could make. Ethan replied that he could make 1 musket every 2 days, provided he had the materials and an assistant. Minji nodded and said there would be 2 assistants. She brought her younger cousin, a 15-year-old girl with huge eyes who could weave baskets with such precision that every twig fit millimeter for millimeter. Perfect hands for winding silver vein onto the barrels. On the 57th day after Ethan's fall into the rice field, the Iron Thorn sect returned. This time there were 15 disciples, 5 mentors, and 1 elder, an elder of the 4th level of body tempering. By local standards, that was serious. By Earth standards, he could punch through a wall and move faster than the eye could follow. They arrived at dawn. The alarm system went off 20 minutes before they appeared. 20 minutes! Ethan roused the village. 18 crossbowmen took up positions, 2 musketeers on the rooftops. Ethan himself stood by the workshop with a third musket. 3 muskets, 3 shots, then 20 seconds to reload each one. If the elder could withstand 3 hits, that would be it. The cultivators entered the village. Ethan didn't wait. He didn't talk. He didn't bargain. He fired. The first musket shot from the roof on the left. The bullet struck the elder in the chest. His ki flared up. His defense held, but the elder was knocked back a step. He looked up in surprise. The second musket. From the roof on the right, a bullet to the stomach. The QI flared up again. His defense cracked. The elder doubled over. A third musket. Ethan from the workshop porch. A bullet to the knee. His chi burst. The elder fell, not from the wound. His knee was intact. Rumors spread faster than Ethan could keep up with. A week after the Iron Thorn sect left, the first stranger arrived in the village. A young woman in a worn traveling cloak, thin, sharp cheekbones, eyes that assessed everything around her as if counting it out in coins. She walked along the road alone, unarmed and unescorted. At her waist hung a canvas pouch with wooden abacus beads. She stopped in the middle of the village and asked the first person she met where the master of Thundersticks lived. Her name was Lee Hannah, 19 years old, the youngest daughter of the Lee Trading House in Silver Harbor. Once, the Lee Trading House had been one of the largest in the province. 3 warehouses, 12 ships, 140 employees. Then her father gambled the business into debt. Then her older brother stole what was left of the treasury and fled. Then her mother sold Hannah to the Blue Mountain sect as a servant to the disciples for 200 spiritual stones. Hannah spent 2 years in the sect. She washed robes, she scrubbed floors, she carried food. The disciples didn't notice her. The mentors certainly didn't notice her either. She was a piece of furniture, a function, an object. But Hannah kept track of everything, always. She knew how much the sect spent on rice each month. She knew the markup the spiritual stone supplier charged. She knew that the sect's treasurer overpaid by 12% for fire crystals because he bought them from his brother-in-law. No one asked. No one was interested. She ran away when she heard the story. Merchants at the market in the nearest town were saying that in the mountain village of Willow Brook lived a mad mortal who had made a thunderstaff and was piercing the chi of cultivators. Hannah didn't know what a thunderstaff was. But she knew one thing. If a mortal makes things that pierce ki, then he can sell them. And if he can sell them, then he needs someone who knows how to sell. She stood in front of the workshop and looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at her. She said she wanted to work. Ethan asked what she could do. Hannah replied by listing her skills. She knows the prices of 180 goods across 3 provinces. She can calculate in her head faster than with an abacus. She knows the routes of 17 trade caravans. She knows which sects buy which materials and at what prices. She knows who owes whom and who hates whom within a radius of 500 LA. Ethan listened, and every sentence struck him like a hammer blow on an anvil. He was an engineer. He knew how to build. But he had no idea how to sell, how to buy, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to calculate profit in a world where currency is glowing stones. He hired Hannah that very day. Hannah began with an audit. She inspected the workshop, she counted the materials, she assessed every tool. 2 hours later, she was sitting on the porch, looking at Ethan with the expression of someone who had struck gold, but the vein turned out to be inside a volcano. She said the workshop didn't have a single contract for material supplies, that the silver vein's reserves would run out in 10 days. That explosive lotus pollen is seasonal and would be gone in a month until the next bloom. That the spiritual iron Ethan uses, made from a remelted sword, would run out after 4 items, and that the only way to get new materials was either to buy them at the market in the nearest town, where prices were 3 times as high, or to find a direct supplier in the mountains. Ethan remained silent. He hadn't thought about that. He was thinking about blueprints, calibers, and charges. not about where to get materials once they ran out. Hana sighed. Then she said she'd take care of it. By the end of the first week, Hana had closed 3 deals. An old miner from a neighboring village agreed to supply raw spiritual iron ore in exchange for 2 crossbows for his grandsons. A family of gatherers in the mountains began drying thundervine root in batches of 200 grams per week for a fixed fee. A fisherman from the stream found an outcrop of the silver vein at the bottom of a river cliff and, for a small share of the proceeds, was extracting fibers in quantities that were industrial by local standards. Ethan watched Hana work and couldn't believe his eyes. She haggled as naturally as she breathed. She saw a number and knew its true value. She never raised her voice and never gave up a single spirit stone. Suppliers walked away from her, slightly bewildered but satisfied because the deals were fair. Hana didn't cheat. She simply knew the price of everything. By the second week, a routine had settled in between Hana and Ethan. In the morning, she'd come in with a list. What needed to be bought, what could be sold, and what orders had come in. In the evening, Ethan would report on what he'd done. In between, Hana would argue with him about anything and everything. He wanted to make bullets out of leadstone. She said that leadstone was expensive and that it was better to use river pebbles treated with spiritual iron. He wanted to give away crossbows for free. She said that people don't appreciate things that are free and that even a symbolic fee gives things value. He wanted to work until midnight. She brought him food at 10 o'clock in the evening and told him that no one needs a dead craftsman and that he'd better go to bed now or she'd hide his tools. Ethan obeyed, not because she was right every time, but because she was right often enough that he began to trust her. On the 20th day after she arrived, something happened. Ethan finished working on a new batch of crossbow bolts. Hana was sitting at the table, counting. She looked up and said that the workshop had broken even. Ethan asked what that meant. Hana explained. That month, they'd spent 120 spirit stones on materials. They'd earned 123 from orders and barter. They'd made a profit of 3 stones. The workshop was no longer operating at a loss. Ethan didn't know what to say. 3 stones. In a world where a sect elder wore a necklace worth 10,000, that was nothing. But it was a start. Hana looked at him and waited. Ethan said she'd done a great job. Hana blinked quickly, several times. She turned back to her accounts and said that great job wasn't a financial term and that she needed the workshop seal for the paperwork on the next shipment. But her ears turned red, and Ethan noticed. The next day, Hana presented her plan to him. She spread out a sheet of parchment on the workbench, covered with columns of numbers. The first column, material costs for the next 3 months. The second, potential customers in the 5 nearest towns. The third, a list of goods the workshop could produce besides weapons. The third column surprised Ethan the most. Hana suggested making tools, not weapons. Tools, spirit iron knives for butchers, axes with reinforced backs for lumberjacks, sickles that don't dull for months, gate hinges that don't rust. She said that weapons attract the attention of cults, while tools attract money and gratitude, and that money and gratitude were a shield that worked more quietly than a musket but was more reliable. Ethan looked at this plan and, for the first time since he'd fallen into this world, felt that he wasn't the only one carrying the weight on his shoulders. Minji gave him materials and knowledge. Hana gave him structure and strategy. Together, they were greater than the sum of their parts. At the beginning of the 3rd month, the 3rd one arrived, Yoon Chae-rin, a wandering cultivator, 24 years old, a spear slung over her shoulder, a worn cloak, riding a spiritual donkey that looked just as exhausted as its owner. And Chae-rin was a student at the Clear Sky School, a small martial arts school in the southern mountains. 20 students, 1 old master, no grand techniques. No secrets of immortality, just a spear, 1,000 hours of training, and the words of the old master, who said that true martial art is not about strength, but precision. Chirin was skilled, fast, precise, relentless in battle, but she had only average spiritual roots, a late start, and not a single patron. In a world where talent without connections is a stone in a river, beautiful but it sinks, she came to Willow Creek to have the tip of her spear repaired. A routine repair, sharpen it, adjust the balance. She'd heard there was a good blacksmith in the village. Ethan took her spear. He placed his palm on it. The matrix ran a full analysis. The shaft was made of iron wood, high quality but old. Micro cracks in 3 places. The tip was made of mid-grade spiritual steel, an enchantment on the blade. Simple penetration enhancement, but applied incorrectly. The angle of the formation is off by 4 degrees, which reduces its effectiveness by about 1/3. Ethan looked at Chirin and said that her spear's center of gravity was shifted 8 centimeters forward, that the formation on the tip was applied crookedly, and that the shaft would crack within 3 months if it wasn't reinforced. Chirin turned pale, not from fear, from shame. This spear was the only one she had. A graduation gift from her old master. She'd carried it for 8 years. And for 8 years, it had been operating at 2/3 of its power because someone had engraved the formation crookedly. Ethan didn't try to console her. He said he'd fix it, that he'd rebalance the shaft, that he'd reapply the enchantment correctly, that he'd reinforce the cracks with silver vein windings, and that it would take 3 days. Chirin asked how much it would cost. Ethan said it would be free if she stayed for a week and helped guard the supply caravan that Hana was expecting from the city. Chirin agreed. 3 days later, Ethan gave her the spear. Chirin took it in her hands. She raised it, she twirled it, she froze. Her expression changed. The balance was perfect. The spear lay in her hand like an extension of her body. The formation worked flawlessly. The tip sliced through the air, and the air parted without resistance. Chirin delivered a series of strikes to the training post behind the workshop. 5 strikes. The post shattered into splinters. She stood over the debris and looked at her weapon. Then she turned to Ethan. She asked if she could stay for another week. Ethan said she could stay as long as she wanted. Chirin stayed. Not just for a week. She guarded the caravans. She trained the village archers in hand-to-hand combat. In the evenings, she sat in the workshop and watched Ethan work. She didn't understand what he was doing. Mechanisms and blueprints were beyond her world, but she saw how he worked, with intense focus, precisely, without any unnecessary movements, like a good warrior. Only his weapons weren't a spear, but a file and a hammer. She told him once that he was strange, that no craftsman she knew made things that way. They hammered, he calculated, they struck, he measured. Ethan replied that precision was more important than strength in any endeavor. Chirin looked at him. Those were the exact words her old master used to say. She said nothing, but from that evening on, she began coming to the workshop every day. The 3rd month began with an order, the first real order from outside. Hana brought it from the city. The merchant Park Chung-ho wanted 6 knives made of spirit iron for cutting meat. Ordinary knives would dull within 2 days on the bones of spirit beasts that hunters brought down from the mountains. Merchant Park was willing to pay 8 spirit stones per knife. Hana bargained him down to 10. Ethan made the knives in 4 days. The template helped calculate the sharpening angle for a specific type of bone. The spirit steel was made from remelted ore supplied by the old miner. The handles were made of ironwood notched to fit the palm. Each knife is signed. The owner's name is engraved on the heel. Merchant Pak received the knives and fell silent for a moment. Then he said that in 40 years of work, not a single blacksmith had ever asked him how he held a knife or what kind of bones he cut. Ethan said that this was called a technical specification. Pak didn't understand the words, but he grasped the essence. A week later, he sent 2 acquaintances. Another week later, 4 more. The workshop began to turn a profit. Not from weapons, but from tools. Knives, axes, sickles, hinges, locks, sewing needles. Each item was made for a specific person. Each had a name engraved on it. Hana kept the records. By the end of the third month, revenue totaled 260 spirit stones. Expenses were 210, 50 stones in net profit. Minji expanded the lab. Now she had a separate mixing table and a shelving unit with 200 samples. She began recording the properties of each material in a logbook that Ethan had laid out for her based on the format used at the defense plant in Michigan. Sample number, name, source, physical properties, spiritual properties, earth chemistry equivalent, compatibility with other materials. Minji filled out the logbook every evening. Her handwriting was even and neat. She didn't skip a single column. Ethan once looked at her entries and said that in his world, this was called materials science, and that people earned a degree for it. Minji asked what a degree was. Ethan explained, it's when people study for many years and then receive a document that says they're experts in their field. Minji thought for a moment and said that she didn't have a document, but she knew more about local materials than anyone else in the 3 provinces. Ethan said that was what expertise was all about. A document was just a piece of paper. Minji didn't say anything in reply, but that evening, for the first time, she stayed late in the workshop. Not because Ethan had asked her to, but because she wanted to finish a section in Journal about the properties of moon moss. Midway through the 3rd month, the event that changed everything, Ethan was working on a new project, the Willow 9, a revolver. 6 chambers in the cylinder, a cylinder made of spiritual iron. A barrel made of bamboo reinforced with a triple winding of silver vein. A firing mechanism made of spring steel. A grip made of ironwood. Charges made from the root of the thunder vine. Bullets made of leadstone encased in copper wire. A 3rd-level matrix guided him through each step. The cylinder was the most complex part. The 6 chambers had to be absolutely identical, a deviation of 1/10 of a millimeter, and the cylinder wouldn't rotate properly. Ethan ground each chamber by hand on a foot-powered lathe. He checked them with a gauge. Minji helped with the polishing. Honey stood nearby and calculated the cost of each component. Che Urin sat by the door with a spear, watching the road. They worked in harmony, in silence, each in their own place. At one point, Ethan caught himself thinking. He had a team, a real team, not subordinates, not servants, people who worked alongside him because they wanted to, not because they had to. On the 20th day of work on the Willow 9, the first cultivator client came to the workshop. Not an enemy, a client, a young man of about 25, a wandering hunter of spiritual beasts. 3rd level of body tempering. He'd heard about the master who made weapons capable of piercing Kui. He wanted arrowheads, 10 of them for hunting ironhorn bulls in the foothills. Ordinary arrows bounced off their hides. Cultivator techniques worked, but consumed too much ki. He needed something that would physically pierce the hide. Ethan sat down with him and questioned him for 3 hours. What distance do you shoot from? What kind of bow? What kind of bowstring? How much does the arrow weigh? How fast does the bull run? How thick is the hide? At first, the hunter didn't understand why there were so many questions. Then he got into it. Then he began drawing on and point out where their weak spots were. Minji brought a sample of ironhorn bullhide she'd found at the market. Ethan placed his palm on it. The matrix spit out the data, thickness 4 millimeters, tensile strength comparable to low alloy steel. Weak spots behind the ears, under the front hooves, in the groin. Ethan made the arrowheads in 2 days, elongated, tapered, made of spirit iron with notches to stabilize rotation in flight. Each was tailored to a specific hunter's bow. Kana charged 15 spirit stones per batch. The hunter left. He returned a week later with 2 ironhorn bull carcasses on a sled. He said he'd killed both with 3 shots each. Before, it used to take 10 arrows and 2 hours of pursuit for a single bull. He ordered 20 more arrowheads, and he brought 2 hunter friends with him. They placed orders as well. Hana drew up the contracts. Minji cataloged the new materials the hunters brought back from the mountains. Cheirin trained the villagers and, in between, taught Hana the basics of self-defense because Hana each went to the market alone, and Cheirin didn't like that. Ethan was building. The Willow 9 was finished on the 68th day. He stood in the workshop, holding a revolver in his hands, 6 rounds, a smooth cylinder made of polished spiritual iron. The barrel was wrapped in a thin coil of silver vein that shimmered faintly in the light. The grip was embossed with a relief pattern, and Willow was engraved on the rear grip, the workshop's emblem. Ethan raised the revolver. He aimed at the target he'd set up in the yard, a wooden shield covered in the hide of an iron-horn bull. He pulled the trigger. The shot was louder than that of a musket, a sharp crack like a firecracker bursting. The bullet passed through the bull's hide and the wooden shield and embedded itself in the barn wall behind it. Ethan walked up to the shield, a hole, a clean, round hole. The hide of the iron-horned bull, which even the blade of a standard third-tier cultivator couldn't pierce, had been shot right through from 30 paces away. He fired 5 more times. 6 rounds, 6 hits. The cylinder spun without any misfires. The mechanism was working. Ethan sat down on the porch and placed the revolver on his lap. He looked at it and thought. This was the first real automatic weapon. Not some ugly bamboo pistol, not a bulky musket, a gun, compact, reliable, 6 shots without reloading. In the right hands, it was a weapon that put a mortal on equal footing with a 3rd-level body-tempering cultivator, or maybe even a 4th-level one. He wasn't going to sell it, not yet. The first one was for himself, the second for Cheirin, the 3rd for Hana, the 4th for Minji. It took Ethan 11 days to assemble his first drone. The 4th-level matrix generated a blueprint that on Earth would have required a CNC milling machine and 3 engineers. Ethan had a foot-powered lathe and Minji. The hull was made of bamboo slats glued together with stone nut resin. As it hardened, the resin became harder than aluminum and weighed half as much. The 4 blades were made of bamboo plates, covered with silk and reinforced with a silver vein. The drive was not electric. In this world, there was no electricity, and there was no way to generate it in the necessary quantities. Instead of a motor, Ethan used the wind snake's vein. The Matrix classified it as a piezoactive biological fiber drive. When a weak pulse of spiritual energy was applied, the vein contracted and relaxed at a frequency of up to 120 times per second. It was a muscle motor, an organic servo drive. The problem was control. Ethan couldn't send a radio signal. There was no radio. But there was a spiritual crystal resonator. 2 crystals from the same filament vibrated in sync at a distance of up to 500 meters. Press 1 and the other vibrates. Ethan made a control panel out of a wooden frame with 4 levers. Each lever pressed against its own crystal. The 4 crystals in the drone controlled the 4 blades. Up, down, left, right, primitive. No stabilization, no autopilot, pure manual control that required absolute concentration. The first flight ended after 8 seconds. The drone rose 3 meters and crashed into the workshop roof. A propeller blade cracked. The body survived. Minji picked up the debris and silently placed it on the workbench. Ethan sat with the remote in his hands, thinking. The problem wasn't with the design. The problem was him. His fingers couldn't keep up with adjusting all 4 blades at once. On Earth, the electronics handled that. The gyroscope, the accelerometer, a feedback-controlled flight controller. None of that existed here. Ethan redesigned the remote. He added a 5th crystal, the central one, connected to all 4 blades via a distribution plate made of silver vein. Now the main lever controlled the total thrust, while the 4 side levers provided corrections. Simpler, rougher, but controllable. The second flight lasted 40 seconds. The drone climbed 10 meters. It hovered. It swayed. Ethan stabilized it. The drone moved forward, slowly, like a drunken dragonfly. But it moved. It circled the workshop, then returned. It landed on the porch. Crookedly, one landing gear leg had broken, but it landed. Cheirin stood in the yard, looking up with her mouth agape. She'd seen cultivators flying on swords. She'd seen elders soaring on clouds of ki, but she'd never seen a thing fly. Not a person, not a beast. A thing made of bamboo and silk, without a drop of qi inside. She said it was impossible. Ethan replied that it was physics, lift, pressure difference, Newton's third law. Cheirin didn't understand a word, but she grasped the main point. Immortal had made a thing that flies, and if it flies, that means it can look down from above. And if it can look down from above, that means no enemy will be able to approach the village unnoticed. Ethan attached a small mirror to the drone, a polished plate of spiritual iron. At a certain angle, it reflected what was below. Not a camera, not a screen, a mirror, but a mirror that hung in the air 30 meters up and showed the road about 2 ahead. That would be enough. By the end of the 3rd month, Ethan had 3 working drones. He named them Dragonfly 1, Dragonfly 2, and Dragonfly 3. Minchi rolled her eyes and said the names were awful. Hana said it didn't matter what they were called. What mattered was that they cost 200 spirit stones each in materials and that they couldn't be sold. Ethan agreed. The drones weren't for sale. They were for protection. It was at that very moment that Megan Walker arrived in Willow Creek. Ethan didn't know she was coming. He wasn't expecting her. He didn't even suspect she existed. He was standing in the workshop courtyard, calibrating the remote control for the 3rd drone. Hana was arguing with a supplier at the gate. Minji was sorting a new batch of Thundervine root. Cheirin was training 2 village boys in spearmanship just another day. Then Aitan heard footsteps. He turned around. A woman was standing at the workshop gate. She looked to be about 25, of average height, short hair, a gray cultivator's robe, a sword at her belt. An ordinary traveling female cultivator. Nothing remarkable, except for her eyes. Her eyes were fixed on the drone in Ethan's hands, and there was something in them that Ethan had never seen in any of the locals. Recognition. She recognized what she was seeing. Not a spear, not a sword, not a formation, a drone. She recognized the design, 4 blades, a central body, a landing gear. She knew what it was. Ethan froze. The woman stepped closer. She looked at him, at his hands, at the blue glow in his right palm, which he'd gotten used to hiding but had forgotten to do so this time. She opened her mouth, closed it. She opened it again and said one word, drone, in English. Ethan dropped the remote. The woman sat down on the ground right where she was standing. She just sat down, her legs buckled, and she sank into the dust by the workshop gate, covering her face with her hands. Ethan walked over to her. He crouched down. He didn't know what to say. His brain refused to process the information. A person in this world had spoken an English word. He said the only thing that came to mind, quietly, carefully, as if he were afraid of scaring her away. "Excuse me?" The woman took her hands away from her face. She was crying, silently. Tears were streaming down her face, and she wasn't wiping them away. She looked at Ethan, and her lips were trembling. She said, "My name is Megan Walker. I was 7 when I came here. I'm 27 now. I've forgotten what pizza tastes like." Ethan sat down next to her in the dust by the workshop gate. Hana stopped arguing with the supplier and watched them. Minji set aside the roots and came closer. Cheirin stopped training the guys and placed her hand on her spear. They didn't understand the words, but they saw. They saw 2 people sitting in the dust, one of them crying, while the other held her hand and spoke in a language no one knew. Megan was telling her story in bits and pieces, mixing English with the local language, losing her words. She was 7 when she woke up in the forest, naked, alone, without the matrix, without abilities. Just a little girl from Connecticut in the middle of a forest full of spirit beasts. She was found by monks from the School of the Quiet Wind, a small monastery in the mountains. They took her in, raised her, discovered that she had spiritual roots, average ones, and nothing remarkable. She became a cultivator, core formation, over 20 years. It was slow by local standards. She didn't complain. She survived. but she had forgotten. 20 years without a single word in her native language. 20 years without a single person who knew what a television was. 20 years convincing herself that the other world had been a dream, that it didn't exist, that pizza was just a strange word from a child's imagination. And then, at the market, she heard a story about the master from Willowbrook, about his strange inventions, about the talking palm, about thundersticks, and something inside her awoke, something that had been sitting in the very depths for 20 years, silent. She walked for 14 days through 3 provinces, alone, on foot, because she couldn't afford a flying sword and because her spirit donkey had died a year ago. 14 days to see a drone in the hands of a man with a blue palm and to hear 2 English words. Excuse me. Ethan didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to comfort her. He was an engineer. He solved problems with blueprints and calculations. But now, sitting before him was a problem that couldn't be solved with a tool. He stood up, went to the workshop, returned 10 minutes later with a piece of parchment and a charcoal stick. He sat down next to Megan and began to draw a map of the New York City subway, line by line, station by station. He'd been to New York 3 times. He didn't remember everything, but he remembered enough. The blue line, the red line, the green line, Times Square, Grand Central, the Brooklyn Bridge. Megan looked at the map. She didn't speak. She just looked. Her fingers traced the lines on the parchment the way a blind person traces the face of a familiar person. She said she remembered. She remembers how her mom used to take her to Central Park. She remembers the smell of hot dogs on the corner. She remembers the yellow cabs. She remembers how noisy it was, so noisy that she wanted to cover her ears. She'd forgotten her mom's name. Ethan sat quietly beside her. Minji brought tea. She set down 2 cups, then she left. She didn't ask a single question. Hannah closed the workshop gate. She hung up a sign she'd carved out of wood herself. Workshop closed. We'll be back tomorrow. Chaerin stood by the gate with a spear, her back to the workshop, facing the road. 3 women who didn't understand a word of what Ethan and Megan were saying, but they understood the main thing. The master shouldn't be disturbed right now. Megan stayed, not as a worker, not as an assistant, as someone who had nowhere else to go. Ethan set aside a room for her in the new addition they were building to expand the workshop. For the first 3 days, Megan hardly ever left her room. She slept. She ate what Minji brought her. She said nothing. On the 4th day she came out, she saw Ethan explaining the principle of a crossbow bolt mechanism to a local boy. She walked over, she listened. Then she quietly said in the local language that the explanation was good, but that the guy didn't understand because he was left-handed and needed a mirror image description. Ethan looked at her. She was right. The guy was left-handed, and Ethan hadn't noticed. Megan became a translator, not a linguistic translator, a cultural one. She knew both worlds. She knew how the locals thought, and she knew how Ethan thought. She explained his ideas in words the villagers could understand. She translated their questions into terms he could grasp. And for the first time in 20 years, Megan Walker felt needed, not as a cultural mediator, not as a nun, as a person who stands between 2 worlds and maintains the bridge. On the 100th day, the princess arrived in Willow Creek. Ethan learned of this from Hannah, who burst into the workshop with the look of someone who had seen a fire. She said that a procession was making its way toward the village. 4 palanquins, 12 guards in crimson armor, imperial banners. Ethan set down his file and asked what that meant. Hannah replied that it meant someone from the imperial family was personally coming to their village, and that it was either a reward or an execution, and that it was usually the latter. Ethan stepped out onto the porch. Chaerin was already standing by the gate, spear in hand. Her face was stony. Megan stood beside her, a sword at her belt. The villagers had hidden in their homes. Silence. The procession entered the village. The first palanquin was empty, just for show. The second one, too. The third one as well. In the 4th sat a young woman, slender, 20 years old. Her hair was styled in an elaborate courtly coiffure. Her silk garments were embroidered with silver cranes. On her fingers were 3 rings set with spiritual stones. Her face bore an expression of such carefully rehearsed haughtiness that it looked more like a mask. Jongso's Yun, the emperor's 7th daughter, the spare, sent to Willow Creek on a diplomatic mission that the court considered exile. Her task to evaluate the master, to determine whether he is useful to the throne. If so, to offer patronage. If not, to memorize his face and report back. Guards lined up around the palanquin. So-yun stepped out. She was small, barely up to Ethan's shoulder. She looked at the workshop, at the soot-stained walls, at the pile of bamboo scraps by the entrance, at Che-rin with her spear, at Hana in her work apron, at Itan in his robe stained with oil and coal dust. Her expression hadn't changed. The mask held firm. She spoke, formally, grandiose. Every word like a memorized. She announced that the imperial court had heard of the master of Willow Brook, that his talents were of interest to the throne, that she had been sent as a representative of the imperial will to establish mutually beneficial cooperation. Ethan listened. Then he asked how old she was. So-yun fell silent, her mask cracked. No one in her life had ever interrupted a diplomatic speech with a question about her age. She replied that she was 20 years old. Ethan nodded and asked if she had had any tea, because his was fresh and still hot. So-yun blinked. She looked at her guards. The guards stared into space as they were supposed to. She looked at Hana. Hana shrugged. So-yun said she'd have some tea. They were sitting in the workshop. Ethan was drinking tea from a clay mug. So-yun was drinking from a porcelain cup she'd taken out of her own palanquin. Between them lay a workbench cluttered with parts. So-yun looked at the parts. Ethan saw her eyes darting across the table. She didn't understand what she was seeing. Springs, gears, barrel blanks, bullet casting molds. But she was trying to figure it out. She asked what all of this was. Ethan began to explain, simply, without technical terms. This is a spring. It stores energy and releases it all at once. This is a barrel. It guides the projectile where it needs to go. This is a bolt. It seals the chamber so the energy goes in one direction. So-yun listened. She nodded. Then she asked a question that made Ethan freeze. She asked why his creations didn't use Kui. Ethan replied that it was because he was mortal and didn't have any Kui. So-yun said that wasn't an answer. She said that any craftsman could infuse Ki into a creation through a formation. Even if he wasn't a cultivator himself, he could hire a cultivator to do it. But Ethan didn't hire anyone. His creations functioned entirely without Ki, and she wanted to know why. Ethan was silent. Then he replied, because Ki is a privilege. Few possess it, but his creations are for everyone. For a peasant, for a merchant, for a girl sold to a sect as a servant, for a hunter who can't afford a spiritual sword. For anyone with hands and a head. If his weapons ran on Kui, they'd become just another toy for cultivators. But he makes tools for people. So-yun stared at him for a long time. The mask finally fell away. Beneath it was the face of a 20-year-old girl who had been taught her whole life to be a function, and who, for the first time, heard the word people spoken, as if it included her too. She stayed for 3 days, officially to evaluate the workshop, unofficially because she couldn't bring herself to leave. On the second day, she took off her silk dress and put on the work shirt Minji had given her. On the third day, she stood at the lathe and shaped a wooden-handled blank. Ethan showed her how to hold the chisel, how to press the pedal, how to keep an eye on the angle. So-yun ruined 3 blanks before the 4th turned out right. She held up the finished handle, rough, with burrs, crooked, and she smiled for the first time since she'd been in the village. Not a courtly smile, a real one. With oil on her cheek and wood shavings in her hair, Hana stood in the doorway and watched. Then she quietly told Minji that this princess was either crazy or the smartest of all 7 of the emperor's children. Minji replied that one didn't preclude the other. On the 4th day, So-yun sent the guards back to the court with a letter. In the letter, she reported that the workshop was of considerable interest and that a full assessment would require a prolonged stay. Hana read a copy of the letter and said that the princess had just signed her own political death warrant at court. So-yun replied that she was already as good as dead at court anyway, just beautifully dressed, the 5th woman on the team. Ethan hadn't planned this. He wasn't raising an army. He wasn't building a harem. He was simply doing things, and people came. Minji, because he asked for her opinion. Hannah, because he gave her a job, not an order. Che-rin, because he repaired her spear to suit her, not some abstract warrior. Megan, because he drew her a subway map. So-yoon, because he put a chisel in her hands and told her to try. Each came for her own reason. Each stayed for her own reason. The fourth month brought the first truly dangerous guest. Ethan sensed something was wrong 2 days before his arrival. The alarm system didn't go off. The drones didn't detect anything. But the village dogs stopped barking. All at once. The dogs that had barked at every shadow suddenly fell silent and cowered under the porch. Che-rin was the first to say it was a bad sign. When the dogs fall silent, it means someone is nearby, before whom even animals bow down. He came on foot, alone, without an entourage, without a sword. A man who looked to be about 50, tall, thin, graying temples, a neatly trimmed beard, a robe of white silk of such quality that each seam was worth more than the entire annual harvest of Willow Creek. At his waist hung a jade pendant bearing the symbol of the Purple Cloud sect, Elder Ho Guan, a cultivator at the false immortality stage. Megan turned pale when she saw him. She grabbed Ethan by the sleeve and whispered in English that this man could kill everyone in the village with a single wave of his hand. His cultivation level was neither body tempering nor core formation. It was false immortality, 3 levels higher than anything they'd encountered. To him, their muskets and crossbows were like mosquito bites. Ethan nodded. He already understood. The Matrix had scanned the Elder, and the data was terrifying. The QE density in his body exceeded anything Ethan had ever seen. His skin was harder than steel. His reflexes were faster than a bullet. His mere presence weighed down on all living things within a 100-meter radius like an invisible slab. Ho Guan stopped at the workshop gate. He smiled politely, warmly, like a kind uncle who had dropped by for a visit. He said he'd heard a lot about the master and would like to have a chat over tea. Ethan let him in, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. Refusing an elder of false immortality is like refusing a hurricane permission to enter. It will come in anyway. The only question was whether the walls would remain standing. They sat in the workshop. Ho Guan drank tea. Ethan drank tea. A workbench lay between them. Ho Guan surveyed the workshop. His eyes glided over the tools and parts, and Ethan could see that the elder understood more than he let on. He lingered on the things that were truly important. The reinforced bamboo trunks. On the resonator crystals. On Minji's journal with data on the materials. Ho Guan spoke, calmly, thoughtfully, without threats, without ultimatums. He said that the world was changing, that the age of the decline of Qi was not a rumor, but a reality, that the continent's spiritual energy was declining by 2% every decade, that in 100 years, half of all cultivators would be unable to rise above the 3rd level, that in 200 years, the great sects would begin fighting over the remnants of Qi, that in 300 years, this world would become a world of mortals, whether they wanted it to or not. Ethan listened. Ho Guan continued. He said that Master Ethan's inventions were no curiosity. They were the future, and that the future must be controlled. Not destroyed, but controlled. The Purple Cloud sect was ready to offer Ethan everything. A workshop 10 times larger than his current one, unlimited materials, protection from any enemies, the title of Honorary Sect Master, a personal guard of core formation, cultivators, access to the sect's repository of ancient artifacts, anything the master desires. In exchange, the master would work exclusively for the Purple Cloud sect. His creations belong to the sect. His blueprints belong to the sect. His disciples belong to the sect. The Willow Brook workshop closes. The village receives generous compensation. Everyone is satisfied. Ethan listened, and every word Hogwan spoke was reasonable, logical, rational. The elder wasn't lying. He wasn't threatening. He was making an offer, and the offer was a good one. Objectively good. Protection, resources, scale. Everything Ethan lacked. Everything he could get with a single word. Yes. Ethan was silent for a long time. Hogwan waited, patiently, like a man accustomed to waiting for centuries. Ethan asked one thing. He asked what would happen to his team. Hogwan answered without hesitation. The herbalist would get a place in the sect's alchemy hall. The merchant would be appointed treasurer. The warrior would take her place among the outer disciples. The newcomer could continue her cultivation under the guidance of the elders. The princess would return to court with a letter of recommendation from the sect. Everyone was taken care of. Everyone is safe. Everyone belongs to the sect. Ethan heard that word, belongs. And everything fell into place. He replied, no, quietly, without drama, just no. Hogwan's expression didn't change. He set down his cup. He stood up. He looked down at Ethan and said that he respected the master's answer, that he was giving him a month to think it over, and that he hoped the answer would be different in a month, because the alternative would disappoint them both. He left, just as quietly as he had come. The dogs started barking an hour after he left. That evening, Ethan gathered everyone in the workshop. 6 of them, him, Minji, Hana, Che-rin, Megan, and Yun. He told them about the offer in full, without holding anything back, including the part about the alternative that would disappoint both of them. Megan said that Hogwan wasn't bluffing, that the Purple Cloud sect was one of the 9 great sects, and that if they decided to take the workshop by force, neither drones nor muskets nor crossbows would stop them. Chai! Rin gripped her spear and said she wouldn't leave. Hana took out her parchment with her name on it and placed it on the table. She said she was a co-owner and that co-owners don't run away. So Yun said she was an imperial princess, albeit the 7th, and that the sect had no right to take the workshop, which was under imperial protection, even if only nominal. Minji remained silent. Then she spoke softly. For the next 30 days, Ethan slept only 3 hours at a time. Hana launched a trading network. She personally traveled to all 12 villages in 10 days on the spirit donkey Chirin, who turned out not to be dead but simply hiding with her old mistress. The donkey was slow and stubborn, but Hana was more stubborn still. 9 villages agreed. 3 refused out of fear of the sects. 9 was enough. Each village received a set: 4 crossbows with explosive bolts, 1 musket, a set of tools, a maintenance manual that So-yun had written in calligraphic script, and Megan had translated into 3 local dialects. In return, the villages supplied raw materials, ore from the eastern village, silk from the southern one, ironwood from the mountain village, silver vein from the riverside village, explosive lotus pollen from the marshy village. Each thread connected the villages to the workshop and the workshop to the villages. Ethan built. The matrix ran around the clock. He expanded the workshop. Now it consisted of 3 buildings: the main forge, the assembly hall, the materials warehouse. He hired 4 apprentices from the village, 2 boys and 2 girls. They were young and quick learners. Minji taught them how to work with materials. Che-rin taught them self-defense. Yun taught them to read and write because half the villagers were illiterate. The first week, Ethan assembled 4 more Willow Nines, 3 for the village commanders, 1 for So-yun, who had learned to shoot with frightening accuracy. Apparently, her years of calligraphy had given her perfect control over her fine motor skills. She hit the target 9 times out of 10 from 40 steps away. Week 2. 2 new projects. The first, smoke bombs. Clay balls filled with a mixture of 3 herbs formulated by Minji.
When broken, they released thick white smoke that lasted 8 minutes and blocked the spiritual vision of cultivators. Minji discovered this by accident when she dropped a jar of the mixture into the kiln. The smoke filled the workshop, and Megan said she couldn't see any kai at all, as if someone had turned off the lights in the spiritual world. Ethan immediately put the smoke bombs into production. 20 pieces in 3 days. The second project? Mines. Ethan had long didn't want to make them. A mine is a weapon that doesn't choose its target. It kills whoever steps on it, a person, a beast, a child. But Megan told him straight out, if the Purple Cloud sect comes with an army, if 100 disciples enter the village, crossbows and muskets won't stop them. We need something to slow them down, something to scare them, to create chaos. Ethan made mines, not anti-personnel mines, not lethal ones, flash and noise mines. A clay casing filled with a charge of explosive lotus pollen and moonstone powder. When triggered, a bright flash, a deafening roar, a wave of heat, no shrapnel, no lethal damage. But anyone within a 5-step radius would be blind and deaf for 30 seconds. Even a cultivator, because the eyes and ears are physical organs, and Chai doesn't protect against light and sound at that distance. He planted 20 mines along the village perimeter. He camouflaged them. He marked their locations on the map he kept in his mind via the matrix. Every team member knew where they were. The third week. Kiana returned from the last village with news. Bad news. The Iron Thorn sect had announced an alliance with the Red Kite sect. 2 minor sects had united. The official reason? Protection against the distorted demons that were appearing with increasing frequency near the northern borders. The real reason? The Willowbrook Workshop. The 2 sects were losing control over the villages, which were no longer paying tribute. The villages were paying the workshop. The workshop was supplying them with weapons. Those weapons gave them the right to say no. The sects weren't happy about this. Ethan listened and nodded. He had expected this. The minor sects were a problem that could be solved. Hogwan was a problem that couldn't be. But the sects would come first. The 4th week. Construction of defensive positions. Ethan stopped taking commercial orders. The entire workshop was working on defense. Jae-rin oversaw the construction of barricades on the 3 roads leading to the village. Wooden walls reinforced with clay and stone. Archery slits for crossbowmen. Rooftop platforms for musketeers. Ethan installed resonator crystals at 5 points along the perimeter. Communication, primitive. 1 crystal would vibrate, and its paired crystal would respond. But now, a sentry on the eastern road could warn the workshop 3 minutes before the enemy appeared. Drones. 3 dragonflies patrolled the approaches to the village. Ethan controlled them in turn. 20 minutes on one, 20 minutes on another, 20 minutes on the third. An hour's break. Then again, his fingers ached from the remote control. His eyes watered from the strain. Megan offered to learn how to fly them. Ethan showed her how. She mastered it in 2 days. Her cultivator's reflexes made her a better pilot than he was. So-yeon turned out to be the 3rd pilot. They arrived on the 31st day, 1 day after Hogwan's deadline. But these weren't Hogwan's men. It was the allied army of the Iron Thorn sect and the Red Kite sect. 40 disciples, 8 instructors, 2 elders, Elder Beck of the Iron Thorn, 5th stage of body tempering, Elder Quan of the Red Kite, 1st stage of core formation. Ethan saw them at dawn through the Dragonfly 2 mirror, operated by So-yeon. The column was moving along the northern road in an orderly fashion. Disciples in front, instructors on the flanks, elders in the center. Not a crowd, a battle formation. They knew where they were going and why. Ethan sounded the alarm in the workshop. 3 minutes. Everyone to their positions. Minji was in the workshop. The ammunition boxes were open. Spare bolts, cartridges for the IV-9s, smoke grenades laid out on the table. She was the rear guard. Logistics. Every cartridge, every bolt,
Every grenade passed through her hands. Hana was at the eastern barricade with a radio, a crystal resonator around her neck. She coordinated the village archers, 12 crossbowmen at 3 barricades, 4 musketeers on the rooftops. Hana kept track of everything. How many bolts each archer had, how many minutes until they needed to reload, how many smoke grenades at each position. Her voice over the radio was steady and clear. Cheirin was at the southern gate, with a spear, alone. She said she'd cover the southern flank herself. If anyone tried to bypass the village from the south, they'd run into her. Ethan didn't argue. He'd seen her train. Her spear, after being repaired and reinforced, was a different weapon altogether. And with that different weapon, Cheirin was a different warrior. So Yun is at the eastern tower, the bamboo watchtower they built last week. The drone controller is in one hand, the Willow 9 on her belt, a long-barreled rifle at her feet. Ethan had made it 2 weeks ago, single shot, rifled barrel, a scope with crystal magnification, range 300 paces. So Yun fired it as naturally as she breathed. Ethan couldn't understand where a palace princess had acquired such a talent for shooting. So Yun said it was calligraphy, breathing, rhythm, a dot, a line. Every stroke is like a shot. Every shot is like a stroke. Megan was in the workshop courtyard, a sword in her right hand, a Willow 9 in her left. She was the last line of defense. If the enemy breaks through the barricades, mines, and snipers, if they enter the courtyard, they'll face the core formation cultivator with a sword and a revolver. Ethan is by the workshop window, behind the Thunder Needle. The Dragonfly 1 control panel is nearby. A radio hangs around his neck. He was the command center, the brain, the coordinator. His job isn't to shoot. His job is to see the entire field and tell everyone what to do. The Thunder Needle is for a single shot. For Elder Quan, formation of the core, the sole objective that nothing else could stop. The army entered the minefield 12 minutes after dawn. The first explosion, a bright white flash, a roar so loud it made even those in the workshop's ears ring. 3 students within a 5-step radius fell to the ground, blind, deaf, spinning in the dust. Second explosion. Third, the column broke up. The apprentices scattered in all directions. The instructors shouted commands, but no one heard them, because the 4th mine went off right under the nearest instructor's feet, and he fell to his knees, covering his ears. Chaos. Just as Ethan had expected, the mines didn't kill anyone, but they broke the formation. They turned an organized unit into a herd of terrified people running in all directions. Elder Peck held his ground, his queef flared up, and the light bounced off his shield like a wall. He yanked 3 mines out of the ground and crushed them in his fists. Elder Quan didn't even stop. Mines exploded all around him, and he walked through them as if through rain. Core formation. Another level. Ethan pressed the radio button. He said one word. Smoke. Smoke grenades flew from the barricades. Thick, white smoke filled the road within 30 seconds. The disciples found themselves in a milky fog, blind, and now deprived of their spiritual vision as well. They could see neither with their eyes nor with their ki. The crossbowmen on the barricades began firing. Explosive bolts flew out of the smoke. The disciples fell. Not dead, wounded, pierced shoulders, torn arms, scorched robes. Not a single bolt hit a head or chest. Ethan ordered them to aim for the limbs. He didn't want to kill, not because he was kind, but because dead disciples meant a war of annihilation. Wounded disciples were a reason for negotiations. The mentors broke through the smoke, 5 out of 8. 3 were left behind, stunned by the mines, disoriented by the smoke. The 5 reached the barricades, muskets from the rooftops. 4 shots, 2 hits. One mentor collapsed with a bullet through his thigh. The second staggered back. The bullet struck his chest, but his kyui held firm. A third time, it held. 3 mentors leaped over the barricade. A single swing of the sword, and the wooden wall split apart. Hannah shouted into her radio. "Breakthrough on the east side!" Cheirin darted out from the south gate, spear in hand. The silver wrapping glinted. She plowed into the 3 mentors like a blade through butter. A strike. One instructor was sent flying into the wall. A thrust. The second doubled over. The spear didn't pierce his qui, but the blow was so powerful that it pinned the instructor to the ground. The third swung his sword. Cheiron stepped aside. A counterblow to the wrist. The sword fell from his hand. A blow with the hilt to the temple. The instructor fell. 3 seconds, 3 instructors. Cheiron stood over them. She was breathing heavily. The spear trembled in her hands, but she stood her ground. Elderbeck broke through the northern barricade. He swept away the wooden wall with a single key strike. 2 crossbowmen were sent flying to the sides. One slammed into the barn wall and fell silent. The second rolled across the ground. Beck was heading toward the workshop. His eyes were empty. Cold. He wasn't angry. He was carrying out a mission. Megan stood in his way, a sword in her right hand, the willow 9 in her left. She fired 3 times. Quickly, a bullet, a bullet, a bullet. Pack's key flared 3 times, 3 dents in his armor, but it didn't penetrate. The 5th level of body tempering was too strong for a revolver caliber. Pack struck. Megan blocked with her sword. The blow sent her flying 10 paces. She fell onto her back, rolled over, got to her feet. Blood trickled from her split eyebrow. She was a core formation cultivator, higher than Peck, but she had cultivated for 20 years, slowly and with average foundations. Her chi was deep, but not powerful. She was a tactician, not a powerhouse. Pack struck again. Megan dodged, a counterattack with her sword to his side. Pack's ki cracked, a fine crack. Megan saw it. She struck the same spot. The crack widened. Pak roared. He retreated. He gathered his ki. He struck with both hands. A wave of air. Megan flew into the workshop wall. The wall collapsed. Minji screamed. Megan lay among the rubble. She wasn't moving. Ethan saw everything from the window. His hands were on the Thunder Needle. But the Thunder Needle was for Quan, for core formation. If he wasted his only shot on Peck, Quan would reach the workshop, and then it would be over. Ethan tore his hands away from the Thunder Needle. He grabbed the Willow 9. He ran out onto porch. Peck was standing 10 paces away. He turned toward Ethan. Ethan raised the revolver. 6 shots, all 6 at a single spot. At the crack in Peck's qui that Megan had made. The first bullet, a crack. The second, wider. The third, the qua burst at the point of impact. 4th went right through, hit his shoulder. Pack flinched. 5th, same shoulder. Blood. 6th, in the knee. Pack fell. Ethan spun around and rushed back to the Thunder Needle. His hands were shaking. The magazine of the Evo 9 was empty. Reload. 10 seconds. His fingers wouldn't obey him. Adrenaline. Horror. 5 seconds. Megan rose from the rubble, alive. Her left arm hung limply. Her right held a sword. She stood over the prone Peck and pressed the blade to his throat. Peck froze. Ethan loaded the last round into the cylinder. He placed his hand on the Thunder Needle. He looked through the sights. Elder Quan was walking down the road through the smoke, slowly, confidently. The mines and smoke had no effect on him. The chi of core formation enveloped him like armor of blue light. He was 100 paces away. Ethan took aim. Quan kept walking. 80 paces. Ethan put his finger on the trigger. 1 shot, 1 chance. Quan kept walking. 60 paces. So-Yun, on the tower, raised her rifle. She fired. The bullet struck Quan in the shoulder. Chi flared up. The bullet ricocheted, but Quan turned his head. For a second. For a single second, he looked up at the tower. Ethan pulled the trigger. The Thunder Needle roared. The sound was not like that of a musket, not like a revolver. It was a blow. A physical blow from a sound wave that shattered the glass in the workshop and knocked pots off the shelves. The bullet, made of a spiritual iron and leadstone alloy encased in copper, flew 60 paces in less time than a heartbeat. It struck Quan in the chest. The core formation. Chi flared blue. Bright, blinding, and burst like glass. The bullet passed through the shield and struck the breastplate of the armor beneath his robe. The plate bent. Quan was sent flying 15 paces. He slammed into a tree. The tree snapped. Quan lay among the debris, motionless. Then he stirred. He raised his head, alive. The plate had saved him, but his chui had been pierced completely. The core formation elder lay in the dust, defenseless, like an ordinary man. Silence. Silence reigned on the battlefield. The disciples lay in the smoke. The mentors lay on the ground. One elder was on his knees with a sword at his throat. The second lay amid the debris of a tree, devoid of qui. Hannah slowly rose from behind the barricade. She looked out at the field, then at Ethan, then back at the field. Ethan stood by the thunder needle. The barrel was smoking. His hands were shaking, but he stood. The battlefield smoldered until noon. Ethan wouldn't let anyone finish off the wounded. He stepped out onto the road and personally examined each student. 23 were wounded. 17 could walk, 6 could not. Not a single death. Ethan stood over the reclining Elder Quan and looked down at him. Quan looked back, without fear, without anger, with the same expression Elder Quan of the Iron Thorn sect had had months ago. Interest. Quan said that in 40 years of cultivation, his qui had been pierced twice, both times by cultivators of the same rank or higher. Today, he'd been pierced by a mortal with an iron tube. He said the world had gone mad. Ethan replied that the world hadn't gone mad. The world had simply become bigger than Quan was used to thinking. Ethan let them go. All of them! The wounded had their wounds bandaged. Minji personally treated the 6 who were lying down with ointments made from moon moss. She worked in silence, quickly, without distinguishing between her own people and strangers. The disciples watched her in horror because just an hour ago, her explosive bolts had torn their muscles apart, and now she was healing them. Quan got up by evening. His chi was beginning to recover, but slowly. The thunder needle strike had damaged something in his core. It would take months to heal. Beck left with his arm bandaged and 3 holes in his shoulder. He didn't say a word. He just left. He took the students with him. He took the mentors with him. He took Quan with him. The village saw them off in silence. No one rejoiced. Ethan forbade it. He said that today they had wounded 50 people today, and that this was no cause for celebration. This was a day that should never have happened. Hannah disagreed. She said that if the workshop hadn't been there, those 50 people would have come for rice, for tribute, for girls, for the cult, and they would have left healthy and satisfied, and the village would have been left hungry and broken. Ethan said nothing. He went into the workshop and closed the door. He sat down on the floor. He looked at his hands. They were still trembling. He had shot a living person 6 times. He had seen the bullets enter the flesh. He had seen the blood. He had seen Peck fall. He had seen Quan fly back from the impact of the thunder needle. At the defense plant in Michigan, he had designed things that killed, but between the blueprint and death lay a distance of thousands of kilometers. Here, the distance was 60 steps. And a face. Everyone had a face. Megan found him an hour later. She came in. She sat down next to him. Her left arm was in a splint, broken in 2 places. Minji had set and immobilized it. Megan said in English that the first time is always the hardest. Ethan replied that he hadn't killed anyone. Megan said it didn't matter. He'd aimed a gun at a person and pulled the trigger. The line had been crossed. There was no turning back. All that was left was to decide how to live from here on out. Ethan asked how she'd lived with it for 20 years. Megan was silent for a long time. Then she said, "It's been hard, but she's living." The next morning, Ethan left the workshop. He washed up, he ate, he sat down at the workbench, and he started working, because that was the only thing he knew how to do. News of the Battle of Evo's Creek spread within a week. 2 sects had attacked a village of mortals, 2 elders, 40 disciples, and they lost. Not a single villager was killed. It was impossible. It contradicted everything the world knew about the balance of power between cultivators and mortals. Hannah said people would start coming to them. She was right. 3 days later, the first ones arrived, a delegation from the city of Stonebridge, 200 li to the south. The mayor, 2 guards, a merchant, they wanted to buy weapons. A lot of them. Ethan refused. He said he didn't sell weapons in bulk. Each item is made for a specific person, tailored to their hand with their name on it. The mayor didn't understand. He was used to buying swords by the dozen. Ethan explained. He said that a sword without an owner is just a stick, and sooner or later, that stick will end up in the wrong hands. He offered an alternative. He would train the craftsmen from Stonebridge. He'll show them how to build crossbows, how to prepare bolts, how to sharpen barrels. They'll make them themselves for their own people with their own names on them. The mayor thought it over for 2 days. Then he agreed. Hannah drew up the contract. The first contract for training, not for weapons, for knowledge. A week later, a second delegation arrived from the village of Red Cliff. 3 days later, a third one from South Outpost. The Willowbrook workshop ceased to be a workshop. It became a school. Ethan taught. Minji taught. Soyun wrote the instructional materials in calligraphic script. Hannah drew up the contracts. Chaerin trained the new recruits. Megan translated. 6 people working 18 hours a day. Ethan knew this couldn't go on. They needed more hands, more space, more of everything. He looked at his workshop. 3 buildings, 10 workers, 20 students, and a line of customers that grew every day. It was time to build a trading post. Construction of the trading post took 3 months. Half a year had passed since Ethan fell into the rice paddy. The village of Willow Creek was no longer a village. It had become something for which there was no name in this world. Hannah called it a trading post. Ethan would have called it a manufactory. Soyun suggested the term re-meat yard. Hannah's word prevailed. The trading post was built by the entire network. 9 villages sent carpenters and masons. The mayor of Stonebridge sent masters of formations. Yes, formations. For the first time, Ethan worked with the cultivators not as enemies, but as contractors. The formation master named Cho Tai-sun turned out to be a frail 70-year-old man with trembling hands and an absolutely precise sense of Kai. He inscribed protective formations on the walls of the trading post, and Ethan stood nearby, scanning every line with the matrix formations. Ethan was finally beginning to understand them. The matrix translated them into engineering terms. A formation is a circuit, a conduit for spiritual energy laid out in a specific pattern, like an electrical diagram, only with chi instead of current and lines drawn in special ink instead of wires. The principle is the same, a closed circuit, energy source, load, switch. Ethan looked at the formations and saw microchips in them. He began to experiment. He took the simplest fortification formation. He applied it not with ink, but with a silver vein woven into the wall. The silver vein was a superconductor of Qi. The formation made from it worked 6 times more efficiently than one made of ink. Old Man Cho dropped his brush when he saw the result. He said that in 50 years of working with formations, not a single master had thought to use plant fiber as a conductor. Ethan replied that in his homeland, they'd figured it out 300 years ago. They'd simply use copper instead of grass. Chu didn't understand the words, but he understood the result. He stayed. He became a consultant. Minji and Choi worked together. She knew the materials. He knew the formations. Together, they created something new. Formations, not inscribed on stone or paper, but soldered into metal via the silver vein. Permanent, unchanging, not worn away by time. Ethan embedded the first such formation into the bolt frame of Ivo's 9, a fortification formation. It became impossible to break the frame, physically impossible. The spiritual steel, reinforced by a superconductor of formation, could withstand an impact that even a tank would envy. The matrix had been upgraded to level 5. Artillery. Ethan read the notification and closed it. Artillery would have to wait. There were more important matters at hand right now. The trading post was surrounded by a wall, a stone wall, with fortification formations made of silver vein. The wall could withstand a direct hit from a core formation cultivator. Tested. Jiren slammed her spear into it at full power and only managed to knock the fist off. Inside the wall, the main workshop, the armory, the tool shop, Minji's materials lab, Hana's office, barracks for the apprentices, the dining hall, the warehouse, residential buildings, 30 permanent employees, 15 from Willow Creek, 10 from neighboring villages, 5 from the city, the Willow Artel, 10 fighters, 5 men, 5 women, all from the villages, all trained by Charon in hand-to-hand combat, all armed with Willow Nines and crossbows. Each knew their position and their sector of fire. Each carried a weapon with their own name engraved on the stock. Hana dressed them in identical robes, gray robes with a silver willow on the back. The first uniform, the first sign of belonging, not to a sect, but to a place, to the trading post, to home. Ethan looked at all this and felt both pride and fear. Pride because it was working. Fear because it was growing faster than he could control. Every day brought new problems. Deliveries fell through. Apprentices made mistakes. Clients complained. Hana resolved 80% of the problems without bringing them to his attention. The remaining 20% consumed his evenings. It was during this very period that the last one arrived, Elder Bake Sol Hei. She came without warning. She introduced herself as a wandering formation master. She looked to be in her 30s. She spoke softly. She moved so silently that Charon didn't hear her footsteps behind her and nearly jabbed her with the spear. Sol Hei didn't even blink. She simply deflected the spearhead with 2 fingers and walked past. Charon stood there with her mouth agape and her face pale, because only someone at least 3 levels above the core formation stage could deflect the tip of her spear with 2 fingers. Sol Hei asked permission to examine the formations on the walls of the trading post. Ethan granted it. She walked along the walls for 2 hours. She traced the lines of the silver vein. She shook her head. She smiled. She frowned. Then she went to Ethan and told him that his formations were crude, clumsy, as if a child had drawn a map of the world with a stick in the sand. But the principle she had never seen before. A formation embedded in metal via an organic superconductor. It was impossible. It contradicted 300 years of formation theory, and yet it worked. She asked to stay for 3 days. Ethan agreed. On the 2nd day, he asked her to help embed a small amplification formation into the gate frame of a new prototype. Sol Hei sat down at the workbench. Ethan handed her the tools. He explained the task. He showed her the blueprint. Sol Hei picked up a thin needle and began soldering the silver vein into the groove Ethan had cut into the metal. 4 hours, in silence, with intense concentration. Her fingers moved with a precision Ethan hadn't even seen in Minji. 340 years of practice. Every movement had been honed over centuries. She finished at dawn. She placed the frame on the table. The formation glowed blue, pure, even. Not a single mistake, not a single deviation. Perfect. Sol Hei stood up. She looked at her hands. Her hands were covered in oil and metal dust. She looked at them as if she were seeing them for the first time. Then she looked at Ethan. And she said that for the first time in 3 centuries, she had worked with her hands. Not with Kai, not with technique, not with the formation. With her hands, physically, and that she liked it. She left at dawn without saying goodbye. She returned 2 weeks later, no longer hiding who she was. Elder Bake Sol Hei, the Purple Cloud sect, the reformist faction. She said she hadn't come on behalf of the sect. She'd come on her own, because for the first time in 300 years, she'd found a place that interested her. Megan pulled Ethan aside and whispered in English that Sol Hei was a nuclear bomb in human form, that her presence at the trading post was both a protection and a threat. Protection because no small sect would dare venture where the elder of the purple cloud resided. A threat because Ho-Guan would now definitely find out where she was and come for her. Ethan nodded. He knew, but there was no choice. Sol-Hee was already here, and she was the sixth. That evening, all 7 gathered in the workshop. Ethan, Minji, Hannah, Chai-Rin, Megan, So-Yun, and Sol-Hee. Ethan had just finished making a set of precision scales on spring mounts for Minji. A small project among the big ones. He'd noticed that her wrist was getting tired from the old weights. He handed her the box as an afterthought. He said he'd noticed her wrist was getting tired from the old weights and that these were more precise. Minji opened the box. 3 spring-loaded scales, polished, with a delicate engraving of a willow tree on the casing. Each one was calibrated for her wrist. She looked at them without raising her eyes. Then she quietly asked if he'd made them for her. Ethan didn't understand the question. He said, "Of course they're for you. Who else?" Minji didn't answer. Hana stood up and went out onto the porch. So-Yun looked at her fan crossbow. Chai-Rin placed her palm on her spear. Megan closed her eyes and ran her fingers over the subway map she carried in her pocket, folded in 4. Sol-Hee set down her cup of tea. She stood up and said she'd like some too. Anything, just something from him. Her voice trembled 340 years. And a trembling voice. Ethan stood in the middle of the workshop looking at the 6 women, not understanding what had happened. Megan later explained it to him in English, quietly on the porch. More at night, she said that in this world, no one makes things for a specific person. Swords are forged in batches. Pills are brewed in cauldrons. Patterns are applied using a template. No one asks how you hold a sword, what kind of hand you have, what feels comfortable to you. Ethan is the first and only one who looks at a person and makes something just for them. Not for a cult, not for rank, not for status, for the hand that will hold it. Ethan listened and said nothing. Then he said that on Earth this is called ergonomics and that it's a basic principle of design. Megan laughed. For the first time in 20 years. For real. Until she cried. In the 8th month, the distorted demons came. Not one, not a pack, a wave, a patrol from the Evo Artel spotted them with a drone on the northern approaches. Dragonfly One hovered at an altitude of 50 meters, and So-Yun at the control console saw in the mirror a black streak moving across the plain like a river of tar. She raised the drone higher. The black streak stretched to the horizon. So, Yun reported to Ethan. Her voice over the radio was steady, but Ethan heard something in it he hadn't heard before. Fear, not for herself, for the villages in the wave's path. 3 villages from their trade network lay directly in the demon's path. Red Cliff, Southern Outpost, Oak Ravine. 1,200 people, peasants, children, the elderly. They had crossbows and muskets and trained archers. But the corrupted demons weren't cultivators. They were something else. Megan explained. The corrupted demons had appeared 300 years ago from the cursed wastelands in the north, creatures without CI, without spiritual energy. Their bodies consisted of something that was neither flesh nor metal nor stone. A black mass that moved and killed. Swords bounced off them. Fire-based techniques left burns that healed in seconds. Formations slowed them down but didn't stop them. Objects had been fighting them for centuries. They'd destroyed stragglers. They incinerated small swarms. But Megan had never seen a wave of this magnitude. Ethan placed his palm on a scrap of flesh from a distorted demon that one of the hunters had brought back a month ago. The Matrix scanned it for a long time, longer than usual. The data appeared slowly, as if the Matrix itself couldn't believe what it was seeing. Inorganic polymer with a self-repairing molecular structure. Bond breakdown temperature, 2,400 degrees. Mechanical strength, higher than titanium. Weakness, 1. The polymer's structure broke down under resonant vibration at a specific frequency, just like glass shatters from the sound of a certain note. Only the note had to be mechanical, not acoustic. An impact with an oscillation frequency of 340 hertz broke the molecular bonds, and the black flesh crumbled to dust. Ethan looked at the data. 340 hertz. On Earth, that's roughly the note F in the first octave. Here it's the vibration frequency of a spiritual iron bullet as it passes through a barrel with a specific rifling pitch. He did the math. Yes. If the rifling pitch of the Evo 9's barrel were changed from the current one to a finer one, if the bullet spins at a rate of 340 revolutions per second as it exits the barrel, it will vibrate at the desired frequency. And upon striking the body of a distorted demon, the vibration will transfer into the flesh and destroy its polymer structure. Ethan assembled the team and explained the plan. Minji was the first to understand. She said that lunar mode generates a vibration of roughly the same frequency when it burns. If added to a powder charge made from the root of the thunder vine, the bullet would gain an additional resonant impulse, a dual effect, the rotation and vibration of the charge. Ethan would have hugged her if it had been appropriate. Instead, he told her she was a genius, and that in his world she would have been awarded the Nobel Prize. Minji asked what that was. Ethan said it's when they give you a lot of money for being smart. Minji said she'd prefer a new shelf for the samples. 3 days. 3 days without sleep. Ethan recut the barrels. Minji prepared new charges. Hana mobilized supplies. Chaerin organized the outpost's defenses in case the wave reached them. With Yun didn't leave the drone control panel, Megan coordinated the evacuation of 3 villages in the wave's path. Sol-hee stood silently on the trading post wall, gazing north. Her face was stony. She told Ethan one thing, that the Purple Cloud sect knew about the wave, that they had withdrawn their people, that they would not defend the villages, because the villages were expendable. Let the demons devour the peasants. The sect would wait it out. Ethan asked why she was telling him this. Sol-hee replied that it was because she had been silent for 300 years and was tired. On the 4th day, Ethan led the Willow Brigade to the northern frontier. 10 fighters, rearmed, new barrels, new rounds. Every bullet vibrated at the frequency of death for the corrupted demons. Joining them was Chaerin with a spear into which Ethan had built a vibrational resonator made of silver vein overnight. The spearhead hummed at that very frequency with every strike. Megan wielding a sword to which Sol had carved a resonant strike pattern. Improvisation, pure mad improvisation. They went out to meet the wave near the village of Red Cliff. The villagers had already evacuated. Only the archers remained, 8 men with crossbows. The bolts had also been modified. The tips were made of spiritual iron with notches designed to create the necessary vibration. Ethan stood on the roof of the outermost house, a radio around his neck. The drone controller in his hands. A dragonfly or two hovered over the field. He could see them, a black mass, hundreds of creatures, ranging in size from a dog to a horse, shapeless, fluid, with hollows that could be eyes or mouths. They moved in silence, not a sound, not a roar, a silence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. The first demons entered the line of fire. Ethan gave the order, fire. 10 Evo 9s fired simultaneously. 10 bullets, 10 hits, 10 creatures crumbled into black dust instantly, without agony, no roar. They simply were, and then they were gone. The Artel fighters froze. They were used to the idea that the corrupted demons were invincible, that even the elders fled from them. And yet, here it was. 10 shots, 10 killed. Ethan shouted into the radio. Reload! Fire! Again! Again! The crossbowmen fired. Bolts pierced the demons, and the demons crumbled. Chaerin struck the creature that had broken through to the barricade with her spear. The spearhead hummed. The creature shattered like glass at the point of impact and fell apart. Chaerin stood above the black dust, and her face was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen before. Alive, fierce, happy. She was a warrior.
And for the first time in her life, she was fighting not against people, but against something that was truly worth killing. The battle lasted 4 hours. The wave was massive, but it was mindless. The demons had no tactics. They didn't flank. They didn't retreat. They charged forward, and they died, one after another, dozen after dozen. By sunset, a layer of black dust, a palm's thickness, lay before the village of Red Cliff. Over 600 creatures destroyed. The Willow Brigade lost 2 men to injury, not a single casualty. The peasants from Krasny Utes returned. By evening, they stood at the edge of the field covered in black dust and remained silent. Then an old man, the village headman, approached Ethan. He bowed.
Not the way a peasant bows to a cultivator, but the way one human being thanks another. The news of the demonic wave struck the world harder than any battle against cults. The cults could explain the defeat of 2 minor clans by the workshop, the enemy's low rank, underestimation, chance. But 600 distorted demons annihilated by a squad of 10 mortals with iron tubes that didn't fit into any worldview. Hogwan arrived a week later. He wasn't alone. With him were 3 elders of the Purple Cloud sect, all core formations. They flew in on swords. 4 blades hovered over the trading post and slowly descended onto the square in front of the gates. Hogwan looked just as he had last time, calm, polite, neat. But something new had appeared in his eyes. Ethan didn't realize what it was at first. Then he understood. Respect, not for Ethan personally, but for what Ethan had built. Hogwan didn't go inside. He stood at the gate and spoke quietly. Only to Ethan. He said that the Supreme Elder of the Purple Cloud sect had made a decision. The Willowbrook workshop would be destroyed, not because it was dangerous, but because it was disrupting the natural order. Because peasants killing the demons that the elders feared was unacceptable. Because if mortals could do what cultivators could do, then why cultivators? Why do we need sects? Why do we need a hierarchy that stood for 10,000 years? Hogwan said that he had personally asked the Supreme Elder to grant some time, 1 month, the last one. He said that within that month, Ethan must leave. Take his people. Disappear. Leave the blueprints, leave the weapons, leave the matrix, and disappear. Then he wouldn't be touched. His people wouldn't be touched. The villages wouldn't be touched. Everything would return to the way it was. Ethan was silent for a long time. Then he asked one thing. He asked if Hogwan knew about the Order of the Forgotten Heavens. Hogwan fell silent. His expression changed for the first time since they'd met. The mask cracked. Ethan continued. He said he knew about the 6 who came before him, about the engineers whom the world had drawn from other realities, about how all 6 had been killed, about the map marked with crosses. He didn't know how he knew this. The Matrix had begun releasing this data 3 weeks ago. Level 5 had unlocked more than just the artillery. It had unlocked the archive. Fragments of data from previous matrices, scraps, pieces, coordinates, names, 6 engineers, 6 deaths. The first died 3 days after being transported, killed by the Order. The second lasted a month. The third, half a year. The fourth, almost 2 years. The fifth and sixth worked together. They lasted 4 years. They managed to build a steam engine. Their workshop was burned to the ground. Their bodies were never found. Hogwan listened. His face went stiff. He said that the Order of the Forgotten Skies was none of his concern, that his concern was the Purple Cloud sect, that the Supreme One's decision was final, and that he had come not to argue, but to warn, because he fell silent, because Ethan reminded him of someone long ago, 1,000 years ago, a master who made things for people, who also refused to leave, who was also destroyed. Hogwan said he didn't want to see that happen again. Ethan replied that neither did he, but that he wouldn't leave. Hogwan nodded. He mounted his sword. He flew away. The 3 elders followed him. Ethan stood at the gate and watched as 4 dots disappeared into the sky. Then he returned to the workshop and gathered everyone. 7 of them sat around the table. He told them everything about the order, about the 6 before him, about the Supreme One's decision, about the month. Silence. Solhi spoke first. She said she knew about the order, that few in the Purple Cloud sect knew about it, that the order wasn't a sect, it was a network. Agents within each of the 9 great sects. They had one mission to prevent the return of technology. Because 10,000 years ago, a technological civilization had nearly destroyed the world, and the cultivators stopped it. They rewrote history, they hid the ruins, they created the order to keep watch. Ethan asked what had destroyed the world. Technology, or the war between technology and cultivation? Solhi didn't answer, but her silence was her answer. Megan spoke up quietly in English. Then she switched to the local language. She said that the order wasn't monolithic, that someone within the order had sabotaged the suppression of Ethan's matrix, that someone wanted him to survive, that this someone had left clues. She'd found them over the past 2 months. Letters, encrypted, left at specific points along her route to Ivo's Creek. Someone was leading her to Ethan. Someone wanted them to meet. Ethan looked at Megan. She took out a parchment, unfolded it. A map. Not a subway map. A map of the continent, with markings. 6 crosses, the graves of previous travelers. And 1 point, not a cross. A circle in the mountains, far to the west. Beneath the circle was an inscription, the beginning. Ethan stared at the map. The matrix scanned it. The coordinates matched fragments from the Level 5 archive. There was something there, something from the previous cycle. Ruins. Technology. Answers. He looked up. 6 faces were staring at him. Minji, quiet and attentive. Hana, with the co-owner's parchment tucked under her arm. Cherin, with a spear leaning against the wall. Megan, with a subway map in her pocket. With Yun with a fan crossbow on her lap. Solhi, with a cup of tea in her steady hands. Ethan said they had a month, that they needed to do 3 things during that month. First, prepare the trading post to defend against the Great Sect. Second, send a group west to the point marked on the map. Third, contact the saboteur within the order. Hana raised her hand and said she had a 4th task. Ethan asked what it was. Hana said they needed to have lunch because no one had eaten since morning and that a hungry command staff is a bad command staff. Minji brought out the rice. Cherin chopped the vegetables. Soyun brewed tea. Megan set out the cups. Solhi sat silently at the table, watching them. These people who, in the face of an army that would destroy them in a month, had sat down and begun preparing lunch together. She said quietly that in 340 years, she had never seen anything like it. Ethan replied that this was called teamwork and that in his homeland, the best teams worked this way. Lunch first, then saving the world. The month passed in 29 days. On the 30th, they arrived. At night, Ethan hadn't slept. He sat in the workshop, staring at the object he'd assembled over the past 3 weeks. The object lay on the workbench, long, heavy, a barrel made of the highest quality spiritual iron, reinforced with a triple winding of silver vein, with sol high formations soldered into every centimeter of its surface. The breech section featured a bolt that Min Ji had polished to a mirror finish. The stock was made of ironwood and engraved. Not Willow, 7 names, his name and 6 women's names. And below that, the Willowbrook Workshop. This was Thunder Needle 2. Not a fixed position weapon. Portable, caliber between a sniper rifle and an anti-materiel rifle. A charge of triple concentrated thunder vine with moon moss. A bullet made of an alloy that Minjai called willow steel. Spiritual iron, silver vein, moonstone powder, smelted at a temperature that only a furnace with a soul-high amplification formation could achieve. The matrix calculated its penetration capability, false immortality. Ethan sat over it at night and couldn't close the casing. 3 hours. He sat there, staring at the open bolt, and thought, this thing was created to kill Elder Hogwan, a polite, intelligent, rational man who had come to warn him because he didn't want to see him die. A man who had drunk tea with him and spoken sensibly. Ethan closed the casing. The click of the shutter sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. Dragonfly 3 spotted them first. So-yun sat at the control panel in the observation tower 3 hours before dawn. In the mirror, she saw light, a lot of light. Dozens of swords in the sky, each carried a cultivator. They were flying from the south, from the east, from the west. 3 columns, the Purple Cloud sect, 100 disciples, 30 instructors, 12 elders, and Hogwan at the front, alone. On a white sword that glowed like lightning, So-yun pressed the radio button. 3 words. They're coming. South, east, west. The outpost was mobilized in a minute. Positions. Everyone at their post. The willow artel on the walls. 20 archers with modified willow 9s. 12 crossbowmen. 8 musketeers. Smoke grenades in every embrasure. Mines in 3 rows around the perimeter. 6 first model thunder needles on mounts. 2 on each side. Minji in the workshop. The ammunition boxes were open. 200 rounds for the willow 9s. 100 bolts, 60 charges for the thunder needles. Minji counted them and knew it wasn't enough. If the battle dragged on for 3 hours, they'd run out of ammunition. She began loading spare rounds right then and there. Her hands moved on autopilot. Gunpowder, bullet, cartridge case, primer. Gunpowder, bullet, cartridge case, primer. Hana was on the east wall. The radio hung around her neck. She was coordinating everything. Supplies, positions, reserves, the wounded. Her voice was hoarse from shouting, but steady. She didn't stop. She didn't make a mistake. 3 months of logistics had turned her into the staff officer she'd never had the chance to become. Cheirin at the southern gate. Her spear hummed. The resonator made from the silver vein vibrated with a low hum. She stood alone and waited. Behind her, 4 riflemen. Before her, the knight. Megan in the courtyard. A sword. A revolver. She was the last line of defense. As always, her left hand had healed but ached in the cold air. She paid no attention to it. So-yun was on the tower, the drone controller, a rifle, eyes accustomed to the darkness after hours on duty. She looked up at the night sky and saw the lights of the flying swords approaching. Beautiful, like fireflies, deadly fireflies. Solhai stood on the northern wall, alone, unarmed. Her kie swirled around her like a cloak of blue light. 340 years of cultivation, elder of the Purple Cloud sect. Today she stood against her own people, against the sect to which she had devoted 3 centuries of her life, against the Supreme One's decision to which she had been loyal for 300 years. She stood on the wall of the trading post she had helped build, beside people she'd known for less than a year. And her hands didn't tremble. Ethan was in the workshop, behind Thunder Needle 2, a radio around his neck, the Dragonfly 1 remote control nearby, blueprints on the wall, a map of positions. He was headquarters, the brain, and the only person with a weapon capable of piercing the false immortal's defenses. 1 shot. For Hogwan, they landed at dawn. 150 cultivators surrounded the outpost. The lights of the swords went out. Silence. Then Hogwan stepped forward, alone, toward the gate. He raised his hand, chi flared in his palm. Not an attack, a signal. He wanted to speak. Ethan stepped out onto the wall. He stood next to Solhi. He looked down at the elder of false immortality. Hogwan looked up. He saw Solhi. His expression didn't change. He knew she was here. He said 1 word. Why? Not to Ethan, to Solhi. She replied, because in 3 months, these people have done what the sect couldn't do in 300 years. They've killed 600 demons. They've armed 9 villages. They've given mortals a chance to stand their ground. She said that if the sect destroyed this, it would destroy the world's only chance to survive the Twilight of Qi. Hogwan was silent. Then he said that the Supreme Leader's decision was final. Solhi said that in that case, she would have to disobey for the first time in 300 years. Hogwan nodded. He waved his hand. The attack began. The first wave, 30 disciples. From the south, the mines went off.
Flashes, a roar, chaos. 12 disciples on the ground, blind and deaf. The rest broke through. Cheirin met them at the gate. Her spear sang. The rumble of the resonator echoed throughout the entire factor. She moved like water. A strike, a step back, a strike, a turn, a strike. 5 apprentices on the ground in 10 seconds. Not dead, broken arms, shattered swords, cracked ribs. She didn't kill them. Crossbowmen on the walls were firing. Bolts found their targets. Apprentices were falling. The second wave, instructors, 20 of them, from the east and west. Muskets from the rooftops, a roar. 5 instructors fell, their ki pierced. The rest made it to the walls. The formations withstood the first blow. The second, the third. Cracks began to spread through the stone. Hana screamed into the radio. The eastern wall won't hold. Deploy the reserves. Ethan pressed the radio button. Cheirin, east. She darted across the courtyard, leaped over the wall, crashed into the mentors on the outside, spear and revolver. A blow with the shaft, a point-blank shot. A blow, a shot. 3 mentors on the ground. The 4th struck with his sword. Cheirin blocked it. The spear hummed. The mentor's sword cracked from the vibration. He looked at the shard in his hand and didn't have time to do anything. A blow to the chest. He flew off toward the trees. The third wave. The elders, 12. Forming the core, all of them. They didn't attack the walls. They rose into the air, 12 figures in the sky. Each was forming a technique. Chi was condensing. The air thickened. The pressure dropped. His ears popped. They were preparing a combined strike, one that would level the walls and everything behind them. 6 thunder needles on the mounts fired simultaneously. 6 bullets at 6 elders. 4 hits. 4 flashes of ki. 2 were pierced. 2 elders collapsed to the ground. 2 held their ground but lost their concentration. Their techniques faltered. The 6 elders regrouped in midair. They struck the walls head-on, each with their own technique. Fire, ice, wind, lightning. The walls of the trading post shook. The Sol High formations flared blue. They held the first strike, the second, the third. Cracks. Soyeon fired her rifle from the tower. Bullet after bullet. Into faces, into arms, into knees. Each shot broke their concentration. It didn't pierce their ki, but it interfered. It distracted them. It forced them to dodge. Precious seconds. The archers on the walls were reloading their thunder needles. 20 seconds. As long as an eternity. Reloaded. 6 shots. 2 more elders on the ground. Sol High stepped off the wall into the air. Her chi unfurled like wings. She rose toward the remaining 6 elders and stood between them and the trading post, 1 against 6. She didn't attack. She stood as a shield. Her qui absorbed the blows. The fire died down. The ice melted. The wind dissipated. The lightning bolts struck the ground. 340 years against 6 disciples, each 80 years old. The difference was like that between a river and streams. But there were 6 streams. And Sol He couldn't hold out forever. Ethan saw everything through the dragonfly's mirror. He saw Sol He's ki cracking. He saw her retreating, centimeter by centimeter, step by step. He looked through the sights of Thunder Needle 2. Ho Guan stood below. At the gate, not moving, not attacking. He was watching, waiting for his men to do the job. Then he would enter himself. Ethan put his finger on the trigger. Ho Guan stood 100 paces away, motionless, exposed, an easy target. 1 shot and it would all be over. The army, without a commander, would retreat. Sol High would finish off the elders. The trading post would hold out. Ethan looked through the scope at Ho Guan's face. A polite face, an intelligent one. The face of a man who had drunk tea with him, who had warned him, who had given him time, who didn't want to see him die. Ethan took his finger off the trigger. He stood up from behind the Thunder Needle. He picked up his radio and stepped out onto the wall alone, unarmed, without kui, without protection. Immortal on the wall. Ho Guan looked up. Ethan spoke loudly so that all 150 cultivators could hear him. He said he knew about the previous cycle. He knows that 10,000 years ago, this world went through a technological era. He knows that the cultivators destroyed it. He knows they rewrote history. He knows that the Order of the Forgotten Heavens killed 6 others like him. He said he understands fear. That technology nearly destroyed the world last time.
but he said it wasn't technology that destroyed the world. The world was destroyed by the war between technology and cultivation because both sides decided the other was unnecessary. He said he hadn't come to replace cultivation. He had come to complement it. He pointed to the walls of the outpost, stone reinforced with formations from the silver vein. Technology and cultivation in a single wall. He pointed to the thunder needles, spiritual iron and mechanics, a rifled barrel, and a reinforcement formation. He pointed to Charon's spear, a master armorer's shaft, and an engineer's resonator. He said that every object in this outpost was a fusion of two paths, not one replacing the other, a fusion, and that this fusion had just killed 600 distorted demons that the sects had feared for 300 years. Silence. Silence hung over the battlefield. The elders lowered their hands in the air. Seol-hee hovered between them and the outpost. Her chi flickered, on the brink, but she held on. Ho-Guan looked at Ethan for a long time. Then he spoke, quietly, but everyone on the field heard his voice. He said that Ethan wasn't the first to speak these words, that the fourth time traveler had said the same thing before his workshop was burned down. Ethan replied. He said that the fourth time traveler had been alone. He hadn't had Minji, who discovered the demon's weakness. He hadn't had Hana, who built a network of 9 villages. He didn't have Charon, who stands alone at the southern gate against 20. He didn't have Megan, who waited 20 years for the moment to become a bridge between worlds. He didn't have So-Yun, who left the palace for a lathe. He didn't have Seol-hee, who after 340 years defied her sect for the first time. He didn't have people. Ethan does, and that is exactly why he won't leave. Just then, a sound rang out from beyond the northern mountains. Low, deep like the groan of the earth, everyone turned. The sky to the north turned black, not from clouds, from demons. The second wave, the real one. The first one at Red Cliff had been a reconnaissance mission. This one was 10 times larger. A black mass rolled across the plain. Thousands of creatures, and among them, figures, huge, 3 times the height of a human, of the rank of the celestial emperor, demons that even the elders of false immortality feared. Ho-Guan looked north. He looked at Ethan. He looked at the thunder needles on the walls, at the willow brigade with their trunks recarved, at the crossbowmen with their resonant bolts, at Charon with her vibrating spear. Then he turned to his elders and gave the order to regroup, face north, defend the trading post. Ethan stood on the wall and watched as 150 cultivators of the Purple Cloud sect turned their backs on the trading post, facing the black sky. He pressed the radio, all channels, Willow Brigade to the north wall, Thunder Needles to the north, Crossbowmen to the north, Minji, all resonance charges, everything we've got, Hana, coordinate supplies, Chirin. Lock down the south gate and come here. So-Yun, drones to the north. All 3. Megan, stay by my side. He turned to Ho-Guan. The elder was standing below. He was looking up. Ethan said that his resonance bullets kill demons, that his charges destroy their polymer flesh, that his archers know where to aim. He said that if the elder covered the front, the Willow Artel would fire from behind his men's backs. Cultivators and mortals, swords and muskets, chi and mechanics, together. Ho-Guan was silent for 3 seconds. Then he nodded. The Battle of Willow Creek began an hour before dawn and ended 4 hours after it. The cultivators held the front line. Swords and technicians hacked at the demons, slowing them down. From behind the factory walls, the Ivy Artel fired. Resonance bullets tore apart the creatures that the swords could only scratch. Thunder needles pierced through the large demons. Crossbow bolts finished off the smaller ones. So-Yun's drones adjusted the fire. Hana shouted coordinates and ammunition supplies over the radio. Minji reloaded her cartridges so quickly that her fingers were bleeding. Chirin stood on the wall using her spear to knock down the demons climbing the stone. Megan covered the gaps with her sword and revolver. Solhi fought in the sky against 3 demons of the Heavenly Emperor alone. 3 centuries of cultivation against creatures without chi. Her formations didn't work. Her techniques didn't work. But her body was faster. Her chi was denser. And hanging from her belt was the Willow 9 with resonance rounds that Ethan had made for her, personally. With her name on the butt, she fired at the Heavenly Emperor's demon from 10 paces away. 6 bullets, all in one spot. The creature, the size of a house, cracked open at the seams and fell apart. Black dust blanketed half the field. Soul High hovered in the air. She looked at the revolver. She looked down at the workshop, at Ethan's small figure on the wall. And for the first time in 340 years, she laughed. The battle was over. The sky turned gray. Then it brightened. Then it turned blue, ordinary, clear. The field in front of the trading post was covered in black dust up to the knees. Thousands of demons destroyed. The walls still stood, cracked, battered, but they stood. The cultivators of the Purple Cloud sect stood in the field, dirty, exhausted. Many were wounded, but they stood. The Willow Brigade stood on the walls. Their barrels were smoking. Their hands were trembling. Their faces were black with gunpowder soot. But they stood. Ethan stepped out of the workshop onto the porch. The sky was gray and blue. Snow mixed with blood, oil, and black dust. One of the drones was burning out on roof of the barn, and he saw them, the villagers. Peasants, ordinary people whom he had armed months ago. They stood in a living corridor around the workshop, crossbows at the ready, silent. Old man Chong Bak, the very same one, with the rocker arm in the first scene. He was standing in the front row. He turned toward Ethan and said, "Master, we're waiting." Ethan wiped his face with his sleeve. He nodded and replied very quietly, "Wait, I'm making more ammunition." He turned toward the workshop and stopped. Ho Guan was standing in front of the gate. His white robe was gray with dust. His sword was cracked. His hands were covered in black demonic blood. He was looking at Ethan for a long time. Then he reached out and removed the jade pendant of the Purple Cloud sect from his belt. He placed it on the ground in front of the trading post's gate. And he said that Willow Creek was now neutral territory, that his word was worth more than the Supreme Leader's decision, that he personally guaranteed it, and that he would like to order 6 Willow 9s for his best students, with their names engraved on the butt. Ethan looked at the jade pendant on the ground. He looked at Ho Guan. He looked at his people. At Minji, who was standing in the doorway of the workshop with bleeding fingers and weary eyes. At Hana, who was sitting on a box of ammunition and dictating a casualty report in a hoarse voice. At Che Rin, who was leaning on a spear and breathing heavily. At Megan, who was sitting on the ground, leaning against the wall with her eyes closed. At So Yun, who was coming down from the tower with a rifle slung over her shoulder and metal shavings in her hair. At Sol Hei, who was slowly descending from the sky with a revolver in her hand, with a smile on her face. At the peasants with their crossbows. At the walls with their cracks and formations. At the workshop with its smell of gunpowder and metal. At his name engraved on the butt of Thunder Needle 2. Ethan Reed, Master of Willow Creek. He turned to Ho Guan and said what he would do. 6 Willow 9s, personalized, tailored to each owner's hand, just like everything he makes, for a specific person whose face he knows. Then he walked into the workshop, sat down at the workbench, placed his hands on the tabletop. His right palm glowed blue, quietly, steadily, just like on the first day. The Matrix was waiting. Ethan closed his eyes for 3 seconds. He opened them and began to work.